Part 1 of the Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. Part 1. Graybeard and Goldhair. The year was 1823. 'Twas when the guns that blustered at the Ree had ceased to brag, and 10 score martial clowns turned from the unwhipped Arikara towns, earning the scornful laughter of the Sioux. A withering blast the arid south still blew, and creeks ran thin beneath the glaring sky. For 'twas a month when honking geese would fly southward before the great white hunter's face, and many generations of their race, as bow-flung arrows now have fallen spent. It happened then that Major Henry went with 80 trappers up the dwindling Grand, bound through the weird unfriending barren land, for where the Bighorn meets the Yellowstone. And old Hugh Glass went with them, large of bone, deep-chested, that his great heart might have play, grey-bearded, grey of eye, and crowned with grey was Glass. It seemed he never had been young, and for the grudging habit of his tongue none knew the place or season of his birth. Slowly he woke to anger or to mirth, yet none laughed louder when the rare mood fell, and hate in him was like a still white hell, a thing of doom, not lightly reconciled. What memory he kept of wife or child was never told, for when his comrades sat about the evening fire, with pipe and chat exchanging talk of home and gentler days, old Hugh stared long upon the pictured blaze, and what he saw went upward in the smoke. But once, as with an inner lightning stroke, the veil was rent, and briefly men discerned what pent-up fires of selfless passion burned beneath the still grey smouldering of him. There was a Rakehell lad called Little Jim, Jamie, or Petit Jacques, for scarce began the downy beard to mark him for a man. Blue-eyed was he, and femininely fair. A maiden might have coveted his hair, that trapped the sunlight in its tangled skein. So tardily outflowered the wild blonde strain that gutted Rome grown overfat in sloth. A Ganymedes haunted by a Goth was Jamie, when the restive ghost was laid. He seemed some fancy-ridden child who played at manliness mid all those bearded men. The sternest heart was drawn to Jamie then, but his one mood never linked 2 hours together to schedule Jamie's way, as prairie weather was to get fact by wedding doubt and whim. For very lightly slept that ghost in him. No cloudy brooding went before his wrath, that like a thunder-squall reeked not its path, but raged upon what happened in its way. Some called him brave who saw him on that day when Ashley stormed a bluff town of the Ree, and all save beardless Jamie turned to flee for shelter from that steep lead-harrowed slope. Yet hardly courage, but blind rage agrope inspired the foolish deed. 'Twas then old Hugh tore off the grey mask, and the heart shone through, for halting in the dry flood-gutted draw, the trappers rallied, looked aloft, and saw that travesty of war against the sky. Out of a breathless hush the old man's cry leaped, shivering, an anguished cry and wild, as of some mother fearing for her child, and up the steep he went with mighty bounds. Long afterward the story went the rounds how old Glass fought that day with gun for club. Grim as a grizzly fighting for a cub, he laid about him, cleared the way, and so, supported by the firing from below, brought Jamie back. And when the deed was done, taking the lad upon his knee, "My son, brave men are not ashamed to fear," said Hugh, "and I've a mind to make a man of you, so here's your first acquaintance with the law." Whereat he spanked the lad with vigorous paw, and having done so limped away to bed, for wounded in the hip the old man bled. It was a month before he hobbled out, and Jamie, like a fond son, hung about the old man's tent and waited upon him. And often would the deep grey eyes grow dim with gazing on the boy, and there would go, as though spring fire should waken out of snow, a wistful light across that mask of grey. And once Hugh smiled his enigmatic way, while poring long on Jamie's face, and said, "So with their sons are women brought to bed, sore wounded." Thus united were the two, and some would dub the old man Mother Hugh, while those in whom all living waters sank to some dull inner pool that teemed and stank with formless evil, into that morass gazed and saw darkly there, as in a glass, the foul shape of some weakly envied sin. For each man builds a world and dwells therein, nor could these know what mocking ghost of spring stirred Hugh's grey world with dreams of blossoming that wooed no seed to swell or bird to sing. So might a dawn-struck digit of the moon dream back the reign of some old lunar June, and ache through all its craters to be green. Little they know what life's one love can mean, who shrine it in a bower of peace and bliss, pang dwelling in a puckered cicatrice. More truly figures this belated love, yet very grievous was the hurt thereof, grievous to bear, too dear to cast away. Now Jamie went with Hugh, but who shall say if 'twas a warm heart or a wind of whim, love or the rover's teasing itch in him, moved Jamie. Howsoever, 'twas good to see Graybeard and Goldhair riding knee to knee, one age in young adventure, one who saw was likened to a February thaw. Hugh's mellow mood those days, and truly so, for when the tempering southwest wakes to blow a phantom April over melting snow, deep in the north some new white wrath is brewed. Out of a dim trailed inner solitude the old man summoned many a stirring story, lived grimly once, but now shot through with glory, caught from the wondering eyes of him who heard tales jagged with the bleak unstudied word, stark saga stuff. A fellow that I knew, so nameless, went the hero that was Hugh, a mere pelt merchant as it seemed to him, yet trailing epic thunders through the dim whist world of Jamie's awe. And so they went, one heart it seemed, and that heart well content with tale and snatch of song and careless laughter. Never before, and surely never after, the grey old man seemed nearer to his youth. That myth that somehow had to be the truth, yet could not be convincing any more. Now when the days of travel numbered 4, and nearer drew the barrens with their need, on Glass the hunter fell the task to feed those 80 hungers when the game should fail. For no young eye could trace so dim a trail, or line the rifle sights with speed so true, nor might the wistful Jamie go with Hugh. For, so Hugh chafed, my trick of getting game might teach young eyes to put old eyes to shame. An old dog never risks his only bone. Wolves prey in packs, the lion hunts alone, is somewhat nearer what he should have meant. And so with merry jest the old man went, and so they parted at an unseen gate, that even then some gust of moody fate clanged to betwixt them, each a tale to spell. One in the nightmare scrawl of dreams from hell, one in the blistering trail of days a crawl, venomous footed. Nor might it e'er befall these two should meet in after days, and be Graybeard and Goldhair riding knee to knee, recounting with a bluff heroic scorn the haps of either tale. 'Twas early morn when Hugh went forth, and all day Jamie rode with Henry's men, while more and more the goad of eager youth sore fretted him, and made the dusty progress of the cavalcade the journey of a snail flock to the moon, until the shadow weaving afternoon turned many fingers nightward. Then he fled, pricking his horse, nor deigned to turn his head at any dwindling voice of reprimand. For somewhere in the brakes along the Grand surely Hugh waited with a goodly kill. Hoofbeats of ghostly steeds on every hill, mysterious muffled hoofs on every bluff, spurred echo horses clattering up the rough confluent draws. These flying Jamie heard. The lagging air droned like a drowsy word of one who tells weird stories late at night, half headlong joy and half delicious fright. His daydream's pace outstripped the plunging steeds. Lean galloper in a wind of splendid deeds, like Hugh's he seemed unto himself, until, snorting haunch above a breakneck hill, the horse stopped short. Then Jamie was aware of lonesome flatlands fading skyward there beneath him, and zigzag on either hand a purple haze denoted how the Grand forked wide twixt sunset and the polar star. A tiptoe in the stirrups, gazing far, he saw no Hugh, nor any moving thing save for a welter of cawing crows a-wing. About some banquet in the further hush, one faint star set above the fading blush of sunset saw the coming night and grew. With hand for trumpet, Jamie gave halloo, and once again for answer the horse neighed. Some vague mistrust now made him half afraid, some formless dread that stirred beneath the will as far as sleep from waking. Down the hill, close-footed in the skitter of the shale, the spurred horse floundered to the solid vale and galloped to the northwest, whinnying. The outstripped ear moaned like a wounded thing, but Jamie gave the lie unto his dread. "The old man's camping out tonight," he said. "Somewhere about the forks as like as not, and there'll be hunks of fresh meat steaming hot and fighting stories by a dying fire." The sunset reared a luminous phantom spire that, crumbling, sifted ashes down the sky. Now pausing, Jamie sent a searching cry into the twilight river-skirting brush, and in the vast denial of the hush, the champing of the snaffled horse seemed loud. Then, startling as a voice beneath a shroud, a muffled boom woke somewhere up the stream, and like vague thunder hearkened in a dream, drawled back to silence. Now with heart abound, keen for the quarter of the perished sound, the lad spurred gaily, for he doubted not his cry had brought Hugh's answering rifle shot. The laggard air was like a voice that sang, and Jamie half believed he sniffed the tang of wood smoke and the smell of flesh a roast, when presently before him, like a ghost upstanding, huge in twilight, arms flung wide, a grey form loomed. The wise horse reared and shied, snorting his inborn terror of the bear. And in the whirlwind of a moment there, betwixt the brute's hoarse challenge and the charge, the lad beheld upon the grassy marge of a small spring that bullberries stooped to scan, a ragged heap that should have been a man, a huddled broken thing, and it was Hugh! There was no need for any closer view, as, on the instant of a lightning flash, ere yet the split gloom closes with a crash, a landscape stares with every circumstance of rock and shrub. Just so the fatal chance of Hugh's one shot, made futile with surprise, was clear to Jamie. Then before his eyes the light whirled in a giddy dance of red, and, doubting not the crumpled thing was dead that was a friend, with but a skinning knife he would have striven for the hated life that triumphed there. But with a shriek of fright the mad horse bolted through the falling night, and Jamie, fumbling at his rifle boot, heard the brush crash behind him, where the brute came headlong close upon the straining flanks. But while at length low-lying river banks, white rubble in the gloaming, glimmered near, a swift thought swept the mind of Jamie clear of anger and of anguish for the dead. Scarce seemed the raging beast a thing to dread, but some foul-playing braggart to outwit. Now hurling all his strength upon the bit, he sank the spurs, and with a groan of pain the plunging horse, obedient to the rein, swerved sharply streamward, slithering in the sand. The bear shot past, and suddenly the Grand loomed up beneath and rose to meet the pair that rode a moment upon empty air, then smote the water in a shower of spray. And when again the lowly ebbing day came back to them adrip from nose to flank, the steed was scrambling up the further bank, and Jamie saw across the narrow stream, like some vague shape of fury in a dream, the checked beast ramping at the water's rim. Doubt struggled with a victor's thrill in him, as hand to buckle of the rifle sheath he thought of dampened powder, but beneath the rawhide flap the gun lay snug and dry. Then, as the horse wheeled and the mark went by, a patch of shadow dancing upon grey, he fired. A sluggish thunder trailed away, the spreading smoke rack lifted slow, and there, floundering in a seethe of foam, the bear hugged yielding water for the foe that slew. Triumphant, Jamie wondered what old Hugh would think of such a trick of getting game. Young eyes indeed. And then that memory came like a dull blade thrust back into a wound. One moment 'twas as though the lad had swooned into a dream adventure, waking there to sicken at the ghastly land astare, like some familiar face gone strange at last. But as the hot tears came, the moment passed. Song snatches, broken tales, a troop forlorn, like merry friends of eld, came back to mourn, overwhelmed him there. And when the black bulk churned the star-flecked stream no longer, Jamie turned, recrossed the river, and rode back to Hugh. A burning twist of valley grasses threw blear light about the region of the spring. Then Jamie, torch aloft and shuddering, knelt there beside his friend and moaned, "Oh, Hugh, if I had been with you, just been with you, we might be laughing now, and you are dead." With gentle hand he turned the hoary head that he might see the good grey face again. The torch burned out, the dark swooped back, and then his grief was frozen with an icy plunge. In horror 'twas as though a bloody sponge had wiped the pictured features from a slate. So, pillaged by an army drunk with hate, home stares upon the homing refugee. A red gout clung where either brow should be. The haughty nose lay crushed amid the beard, thick with slow ooze, whence like a devil leered the battered mouth convulsed into a grin. Nor did the darkness cover, for therein some torch unsnuffed, with blear funereal flare, still painted upon black that alien stare to make the lad more terribly alone. Then in the gloom there rose a broken moan, quick stifled, and it seemed that something stirred about the body. Doubting that he heard, the lad felt, with a panic catch of breath, pale vagrants from the legendary of death, potential in the shadows there. But when the motion and the moaning came again, hope, like a shower at daybreak, cleansed the dark, and in the lad's heart something like a lark sang morning. Bending low he crooned, "Hugh, Hugh, it's Jamie, don't you know? I'm here with you." As one who in a nightmare strives to tell, shouting across the gap of some dim hell what things assail him, so it seemed Hugh heard, and flung some unintelligible word athwart the muffling distance of his swoon. Now, kindled by the yet unrisen moon, the east went pale, and like a naked thing a little wind ran vexed and shivering along the dust, till Jamie shivered too, and worried lest 'twere bitter cold where Hugh hung clutching at the bleak raw edge of life. So Jamie rose, and with his hunting knife split wood and built a fire. Nor did he fear the staring face now, for he found it dear with the warm presence of a friend returned. The fire made cosy chatter as it burned, and reared a tent of light in that lone place. Then Jamie set about to bathe the face with water from the spring, oft crooning low, "It's Jamie here beside you, don't you know?" Yet came no answer save the laboured breath of one who wrestled mightily with death, where watched no referee to call the foul. The moon now cleared the world's end, and the owl gave voice unto the wizardry of light, while in some dim-lit chancel of the night snouts the goddess wolfish corybants intoned their wild antiphonary chants, the oldest, saddest worship in the world. And Jamie watched until the firelight swirled softly about him, sound and glimmer merged, to make an eerie void, through which he urged with frantic spur some whirlwind of a steed that made the way as glass beneath his speed, yet scarce kept pace with something dear that fled on, ever on, just half a dream ahead, until it seemed by some vague shape dismayed. He cried aloud for Hugh, and the steed neighed a neigh that was a burst of light, not sound, and Jamie, sprawling on the dewy ground, knew that his horse was sniffing at his hair, while mumbling through the early morning air there came a roll of many hoofs, and then he saw the swinging troop of Henry's men a canter up the valley with the sun. Of all Hugh's comrades crowding round, not one but would have given heavy odds on death. For, though the Graybeard fought with sobbing breath, no man, it seemed, might break upon the hip so stern a wrestler, with the strangling grip that made the neck veins like a purple thong tangled with knots. Nor might Hugh tarry long there where the trail forked outward far and dim, or so it seemed. And when they lifted him, his moan went treble like a song of pain, he was so tortured. Surely it were vain to hope he might endure the toilsome ride across the barrens. Better let him bide there on the grassy couch beside the spring. And, furthermore, it seemed a foolish thing that 80 men should wait the issue there. For dying is a game of solitaire, and all men play the losing hand alone. But when at noon he had not ceased to moan, and fought still like the strong man he had been, there grew a vague mistrust that he might win, and all this be a tale for wondering ears. So Major Henry called for volunteers, 2 men among the 80 who would stay to wait on Glass and keep the wolves away until he did whatever he should do. All quite agreed 'twas bitter bread for Hugh, yet none save Jamie felt in duty bound to run the risk. Until the hat went round and pity wakened at the silver's clink in Jules Le Bon. He would not have them think that mercenary motives prompted him, but somehow just the grief of little Jim was quite sufficient, not to mention Hugh. He weighed the risk. As everybody knew, the Rickarees were scattered to the west. The late campaign had stirred a hornet's nest to fill the land with stingers, which was so, and yet 3 days a southwest wind may blow, false April, with no drop of dew at heart. So Jules ran on, while ready for the start the pouring horses nickered and the men, impatient in their saddles, yawned. And then, with brief advice, a round of bluff goodbyes, and some few reassuring backward cries, the troop rode up the valley with the day. Intent upon his friend, with naught to say, sat Jamie, while Le Bon discussed at length the reasonable limits of a man's strength, a self-conducted dialectic strife that made absurd all argument for life, and granted but a fresh dug hole for Hugh. 'Twas half like murder. Yet it seemed Jules knew unnumbered tales accordant with the case, each circumstantial as to time and place, and furnished with a death's head colophon. Vivaciously despondent, Jules ran on. Did he not share his judgment with the rest? You see, 'twas some contusion of the chest that did the trick. Heart, lungs, and all that, mixed in such a way they never could be fixed. A bear's hug, ugh! And often Jamie winced at some knife thrust of reason that convinced, yet left him sick with unrelinquished hope, as one who in a darkened room might grope for some beloved face with shuddering anticipation of a clammy thing. So in the lad's heart sorrow fumbled round for some old joy to lean upon, and found the stark cold something Jamie knew was there. Yet womanlike he stroked the hoary hair or bathed the face, while Jules found tales to tell, lugubriously garrulous. Night fell. At sundown, day-long winds are like to veer, so summoning a mood of relished fear, Le Bon remembered dire alarms by night, the swoop of savage hordes, the desperate fight of men outnumbered. And, like him of old, in all that made Jules shudder as he told, his the great part, a man by field and flood, fate tossed upon the gloom he limned in blood, their situation's possibilities. 2 men against the fury of the Rees, a game in which 200 men had failed. He pointed out how little it availed to run the risk for one as good as dead. Yet Jules Le Bon meant every word he said, and had a scalp to lose if need should be. That night through Jamie's dreaming swarmed the Ree. Grey-souled he wakened to a dawn of grey, and felt that something strong had gone away, nor knew what thing. Some whisper of the will bade him rejoice that Hugh was living still, but Hugh, the real, seemed somehow otherwhere. Jules, snug and snoring in his blanket, there was half a life the nearer. Just so pain is nearer than the peace we seek in vain, and by its very sting compels belief. Jules woke, and with a fine restraint of grief saw early dissolution. One more night, and then the poor old man would lose the fight. Ah, such a man! A day and night crept by, and yet the stubborn fighter would not die, but grappled with the angel all the while. With some conviction, but with more of guile, Jules colonized the vacancy with Rees, till Jamie felt that looseness of the knees that comes of oozing courage. Many men may tower for a white-hot moment when the wild blood surges at a sudden shock, but when insistent as a ticking clock blind peril haunts and whispers, fewer dare. Dread hovered in the hushed and moony air the long night through, nor might a fire be lit lest some far-seeing foe take note of it. And day-long Jamie scanned the blank sky rim for hoof-flung dust clouds, till there woke in him a childish anger, dumb for ruth and shame that Hugh so dallied. But the 4th dawn came, and with it lulled the fight, as on a field where broken armies sleep but will not yield. Or had one conquered? Was it Hugh or death? The old man breathed with faintly fluttering breath, nor did his body shudder as before. Jules triumphed sadly. It would soon be o'er. So men grew quiet when they lost their grip and did not care. At sundown he would slip into the deeper silence. Jamie wept, unwitting how a furtive gladness crept into his heart that gained a stronger beat. So cities, long beleaguered, take defeat unto themselves, half traitors. Jules began to dig a hole that might conceal a man, and as his sheath knife broke the stubborn sod, he spoke in kindly vein of life and God and mutability and rectitude. The immemorial funerary mood brought tears, mute tribute to the mother dust, and Jamie, seeing, felt each cutting thrust less like a stab into the flesh of Hugh. The sun crept up and down the arc of blue, and through the air a chill of evening ran. But though the grave yawned, waiting for the man seemed scarce yet ready for the grave. Now, prompted by a coward or a knave that lurked in him, Le Bon began to hear faint sounds that to the lad's less cunning ear were silence, more like tremors of the ground. They were, Jules said, than any proper sound. Thus one detected horsemen miles away. For many moments big with fate he lay, ear pressed to earth, then rose and shook his head as one perplexed. "There's something wrong," he said. And, as at daybreak, white and winter skies, agape and staring with a wild surmise, the lad's face whitened at the other's word. Jules could not quite interpret what he heard. 100 horse might noise their whereabouts in just that fashion. Yet he had his doubts. It could be bison moving quite as well. But if 'twere Rees, there'd be a tale to tell that two men he might name should never hear. He reckoned scalps that fall were selling dear. In keeping with the limited supply, men fit to live were not afraid to die. Then, in that caution suits not courage ill, Jules saddled up and cantered to the hill, a white dam set against the twilight stream. And as a horseman riding in a dream, the lad beheld him, watched him clamber up to where the dusk, as from a brimming cup, ran over, saw him pause against the gloom, portentous, huge, a brooder upon doom. What did he look upon? Some moments passed. Then suddenly it seemed as though a blast of wind, keen cutting with the whips of sleet, smote horse and rider. Haunched on huddled feet, the steed shrank from the ridge, then rearing wheeled and took the rubbly incline, fury heeled. Those days and nights, like seasons creeping slow, had told on Jamie. Better blow on blow of evil hap, with doom seen clear ahead, than that monotonous abrasive dread, blind Nora at the soul thews of the blind. Thin worn, the last heart-string that held him kind, strung taut, the final tie that kept him true, now snapped in Jamie as he saw the two, so goaded by some terrifying sight. Death riding with the vanguard of the night, life dwindling yonder with the rear of day. What choice for one whom panic swept away from moorings in the sanity of will? Jules came and summed the vision of the hill in one hoarse cry that left no word to say. "Rees! Saddle up! We've got to get away!" Small wit had Jamie left to ferret guile, but fumblingly obeyed Le Bon the while. Jules knelt beside the man who could not flee. For big hearts lack not time for charity, however thick the blows of fate may fall. Yet in that, Jules Le Bon was practical. He could not quite ignore a hunting knife, a flint, a gun, a blanket, gear of life scarce suited to the customs of the dead. And Hugh slept soundly in his ample bed, star-canopied and blanketed with night, unwitting how venality and fright made hot the westward trail of Henry's men. End of part 1. Recorded by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. Part 2. The Awakening. No one may say what time elapsed, or when the slumbrous shadow lifted over Hugh, but some globose immensity of blue enfolded him at last, within whose light he seemed to float, as some faint swimmer might, a deep beneath and overhead a deep. So one late plunged into a lethal sleep, a spirit diver fighting for his breath, swoops through the many-fathomed glooms of death, emerging in a daylight strange and new. Rousing a liquid wonder came on Hugh at the quiet, steep-arched splendour of the day. Agrope for some dim memory, he lay upon his back and watched a lucent fleece fade in the blue profundity of peace, as did the memory he sought in vain. Then with a stirring of mysterious pain, old habit of the body bade him rise. But when he would obey, the hollow skies broke as a bubble punctured and went out. Again he woke, and with a drowsy doubt remote unto his horizontal gaze, he saw the world's end kindle to a blaze, and up the smoky steep pale heralds run. And when at length he knew it for the sun, dawn found the darkling reaches of his mind, where in the twilight he began to find strewn shards and torsos of familiar things, as from the rubble in a place of kings men school the dream to build the past anew. So out of dream and fragment builded Hugh, and came upon the reason of his plight, the bear's attack, the shot, and then the night wherein men talked as ghosts about a grave. Some consciousness of will the memory gave. He would get up. The painful effort spent made the wide heavens billow as a tent wind struck, the shaken prairies sag and roll. Some moments with an effort at control he swayed, half raised upon his arms, until the dizzy cosmos righted and was still. Then would he stand erect and be again the man he was. An overwhelming pain smote him to earth, and one unruly limb refused the weight and crumpled under him. Sickened with torture, he lay huddled there, gazing about him with a great despair proportioned to the might that felt the chain. Far flung as dawn, collusive sky and plain stared bleak denial back. Why strive at all? That vacancy about him, like a wall, yielding as light a granite scarp to climb. Some little waiting on the creep of time, abandonment to circumstance, and then here flashed a sudden thought of Henry's men into his mind, and drove the gloom away. They would be riding westward with the day. How strange he had forgot that battered leg or some scalp wound had set his wits abeg. Was this Hugh Glass to whimper like a squaw? Grimly amused, he raised his head and saw the empty distance, listened long and heard naught but the twitter of a lonely bird that emphasized the hush. Was something wrong? 'Twas not the Major's way to dally long, and surely they had camped not far behind. Now woke a query in his troubled mind: where was his horse? Again came creeping back the circumstances of the bear's attack. He had dismounted, thinking at the spring to spend the night, and then the grisly thing. Of course the horse had bolted, plain enough. But why was all the soil about so rough, as though a herd of horses had been there? The riddle vexed him till his vacant stare fell on a heap of earth beside a pit. What did that mean? He wormed his way to it, the newly wakened wonder dulling pain. No paw of beast had scooped it, that was plain. 'Twas squared, indeed 'twas like a grave, he thought. A grave, a grave. The mental echo wrought sick fancies. Who had risen from the dead? Who lying there had heard above his head the ghostly talkers deaf unto his shout? Now, searching all the region round about as though the answer were a lurking thing, he saw along the margin of the spring an ash heap and the litter of a camp. Suspicion, like a little smoky lamp that daubs the murk but cannot fathom it, flung bare grotesques before his groping wit. Had Rees been there, and he alive? Who then? And were he dead, it might be Henry's men. How many suns had risen while he slept? The smoky glow flared wildly, and he crept the dragged limb throbbing, till at length he found the trail of many horses westward bound, and in one breath the groping light became a gloom-devouring ecstasy of flame, a dazing conflagration of belief. Plunged deeper than the seats of hate and grief, he gazed about for aught that might deny such baseness, saw the non-committal sky, the prairie apathetic in a shroud, the bland complacence of a vagrant cloud, world-wide connivance. Smilingly the sun approved a land wherein such deeds were done, and careless breezes, like a troop of youth, unawed before the presence of such truth, went scampering amid the tousled brush. Then by and by came on him with a rush his weakness and the consciousness of pain, while with the chill insistence of a rain that pelts the sodden wreck of summer's end, his manifest betrayal by a friend beat in upon him. Jamie had been there, and Jamie did not care. What no man yet had witnessed, the wide sky looked down and saw, a light wind idling by heard, what no ear of mortal yet had heard. For he, whose name was like a magic word to conjure the remote heroic mood of valiant deed and splendid fortitude, wherever two that shared a fire might be, gave way to grief and wept unmanfully, yet not as they for whom tears fall like dew to green a frosted heart again, wept Hugh, so thewed to strive, so engined to prevail and make harsh fate the zany of a tale. His own might shook and tore him. For a span he lay a grey old ruin of a man, with all his years upon him like a snow. And then at length, as from the long ago, remote beyond the other side of wrong, the old love came like some remembered song, whereof the strain is sweet, the burden sad. A retrospective vision of the lad grew up in him, as in a foggy night the witchery of semi-lunar light mysteriously quickens all the air. Some memory of wind-blown golden hair, the boyish laugh, the merry eyes of blue, wrought marvellously in the heart of Hugh, as under snow the demon of the spring. And momently it seemed a little thing to suffer, nor might treachery recall the miracle of being loved at all, the privilege of loving to the end. And thereupon a longing for his friend made life once more a struggle for the prize. To look again upon the merry eyes, to see again the wind-blown golden hair. Aye, one should lavish very tender care upon the vessel of a hope so great, lest it be shattered, and the precious freight as water on the arid waste poured out. Yet, though he longed to live, a subtle doubt still turned on him the weapon of his pain. Now, as before, collusive sky and plain outstared his purpose for a puny thing. Praying to live, he crawled back to the spring with something in his heart like gratitude, that by good luck his gun might furnish food, his blanket shelter, and his flint a fire. For after all, what thing do men desire to be or have but these condition it? These with a purpose and a little wit, and howsoever smitten one might rise, push back the curtain of the curving skies, and come upon the living dream at last. Exhausted by the spring he lay, and cast dull eyes about him. What did it portend? Naught but the footprints of a fickle friend. A yawning grave and ashes met his eyes. Scarce feeling yet the shock of a surprise, he searched about him for his flint and knife, knew vaguely that his seeking was for life, and that the place was empty where he sought. No food, no fire, no shelter? Dully wrought the bleak negation in him, slowly crept to where, despite the pain, his love had kept a shrine for Jamie undefiled of doubt. Then suddenly conviction like a shout aroused him. Jamie was a thief! The very difficulty of belief was fuel for the simmering of rage that grew and grew the more he strove to gauge the underlying motive of the deed. Untempered youth might fail a friend in need, but here had wrought some devil of the will, some heartless thing too cowardly to kill, that left to nature what it dared not do. So bellowsed, all the kindled soul of Hugh became a still white hell of brooding ire, and through his veins regenerating fire ran, driving out the lethargy of pain. Now once again he scanned the yellow plain, conspirant with the overbending skies, and lo, the one was blue as Jamie's eyes, the other of the colour of his hair, twin hues of falseness, merging to a stare, as though such guilt, thus visibly immense, regarded its effect with insolence. Alas for those who fondly place above the act of loving what they chance to love, who prize the goal more dearly than the way. For time shall plunder them, and change betray, and life shall find them vulnerable still. A bitter-sweet narcotic to the will, Hugh's love increased the peril of his might. But anger broke the slumber of his might, quickened the heart and warmed the blood that ran. Defiance for the treachery of man, defiance for the meaning of his pain, defiance for the distance of the plain that seemed to gloat, "You cannot master me." And for one burning moment he felt free to rise and conquer in a wind of rage. But as a tiger conscious of the cage a smoulder with a purpose, broods and waits. So with the sullen patience that is hate's, Hugh taught his wrath to bide expedience. Now cognizant, a very quickened sense thirst came upon him. Leaning to the spring, he stared with fascination on a thing that rose from giddy deeps to share the draught. A face it was, so tortured that it laughed, a ghastly mask that murder well might wear. And while as one they drank together there, it was as though the deed he meant to do took shape and came to kiss the lips of Hugh, lest that revenge might falter. Hunger woke, and from the bush with leafage grey as smoke, wherein like flame the bullberries glinted red, scarce sweeter than the heart of him they fed, Hugh feasted. And the hours of waiting crept, a gloom, a glow, and though he waked or slept, the pondered purpose or a dream that wrought by night the murder of his waking thought sustained him till he felt his strength returned. And then at length the longed for morning burned and beckoned down the waste way he should crawl, that waste to be surmounted as a wall, sky rims and yet more sky rims steep to climb, that simulacrum of enduring time, the 100 empty miles twixt him and where the stark Missouri ran. Yet why not dare? Despite the useless leg, he could not die 1 hair's breadth farther from the earth and sky, or more remote from kindness. End of part 2. Recorded by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. Part 3 of The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. Part 3. The Crawl. Straight away, beneath the flare of dawn, the Ree-land lay, and through it ran the short trail to the goal. Thereon a grim turnpikeman waited toll, but 'twas so doomed that southering geese should flee 9 times ere yet the vengeance of the Ree should make their foe the haunter of a tale. Midway to safety on the northern trail, the scoriac region of a hell burned black forbade the crawler, and for all his lack Hugh had no heart to journey with the suns. No suppliant unto those faithless ones should bid for pity at the Bighorn's mouth. The greater odds for safety in the south allured him, so he felt the midday sun blaze down the coulee of a little run that dwindled upward to the watershed, whereon the feeders of the Morrow head, scarce more than deep carved runes of vernal rain. The trailing leg was like a galling chain, and bound him to a doubt that would not pass. Defiant clumps of thirst embittered grass that bit parched earth with bared and fang-like roots. Dwarf thickets, jealous for their stunted fruits, harsh-tempered by their disinheritance. These symbolized the enmity of chance for him who, with his fate unreconciled, equipped for travel as a weanling child, essayed the journey of a mighty man. Like agitated oil the heat waves ran, and made the scabrous gulch appear to shake as some reflected landscape in a lake, where laggard breezes move. A taunting reek rose from the grudging seepage of the creek, whereof Hugh drank and still would drink, and where the mottled shadow dripped as ink from scanty thickets on the yellow glare. The crawler faltered, with no heart to dare again the torture of that toil, until the master thought of vengeance woke the will to goad him forth. And when the sun quiesced amid ironic heavens in the west, the region of false friends, Hugh gained a rise, whence to the fading cincture of the skies a purpling panorama swept away. Scarce farther than a shout might carry lay the place of his betrayal. He could see the yellow blotch of earth where treachery had digged his grave. O futile wrath and toil, tucked in beneath yon coverlet of soil, turned back for him. How soundly had he slept! Fool, fool, to struggle when he might have crept so short a space, yet farther than the flight of swiftest dreaming through the longest night into the quiet house of no false friend. Alas for those who seek a journey's end! They have it ever with them like a ghost, nor shall they find who deem they seek it most, but crave the end of human ends, as Hugh. Now swoopingly The world of dream broke through the figured wall of sense. It seemed he ran as wind above the creeping ways of man, and came upon the place of his desire, where burned far luring as a beacon fire the face of Jamie. But the vengeful stroke bit ere the darkness lifted like a smoke, and it was early morning. Gazing far from where the west yet kept pallid star to thinner sky where dawn was wearing through, Hugh shrank with dread, reluctant to renew the war with that serene antagonist. More fearsome than a smashing iron fist seemed that vast negativity of might, until the frustrate vision of the night came moonwise on the gloom of his despair. And lo, the foe was naught but yielding air, a vacancy to fill with his intent. So from his spacious bed he rose and went 3-footed, and the vision goaded him all morning southward to the bare sky rim. The rugged coulee zigzagged, mounting slow, and ever as it rose the lean creek's flow dwindled and dwindled steadily, until at last a scooped out basin would not fill. And thenceforth 'twas a way of mocking dust. But in that Hugh still kept the driving lust for vengeance. This new circumstance of fate served but to brew more venom for his hate, and nerved him to avail the most with least. Ere noon the crawler chanced upon a feast of breadroot sunning in a favoured draw. A sentry gopher from his stronghold saw some 3-legged beast, bear-like, yet not a bear, with quite misguided fury, digging where no hapless brother gopher might be found. And while, with striped nose above his mound, the sentinel chirped shrilly to his clan scare tales of that anomaly, the man devoured the chance-flung manna of the plains, that some vague reminiscence of old rains kept succulent despite the burning drouth. So with new vigour Hugh assailed the south, his pockets laden with the precious roots, against that coming traverse where no fruits of herb or vine or shrub might brave the land spread roof-like twixt the Morro and the Grand. The coulee deepened. Yellow walls flung high sheer to the ragged strip of blinding sky dazzled and sweltered in the glare of day. Capricious draughts that woke and died away into the heavy drowse were breathed as flame. And midway down the afternoon Hugh came upon a little patch of spongy ground. His thirst became a rage. He gazed around, seeking a spring, but all about was dry, a strewn bones bleaching to a desert sky. Nor did a clawed hole, bought with needed strength, return a grateful ooze. And when at length Hugh sucked the mud, he spat it in disgust. It had the acrid tang of broken trust, the sweetish, tepid taste of feigning love. Still hopeful of a spring somewhere above, he crawled the faster for his taunted thirst. More damp spots, no less grudging than the first, occurred with growing frequence on the way, until amid the purple wane of day the crawler came upon a little pool. Clear as a friend's heart 'twas, and seeming cool, a crystal bowl whence skyey deeps looked up. So might a god set down his drinking cup, charged with a distillation of haut skies, as famished horses, thrusting to the eyes parched muzzles, take a long-sought water-hole. Hugh plunged his head into the brimming bowl as though to share the joy with every sense. And lo, the tang of that wide insolence of sky and plain was acrid in the draught. How ripplingly the lying water laughed, how like fine sentiment the mirrored sky. One credence for a sink of alkali, so with false friends. And yet, as may accrue from specious love some profit of the true, one gift of kindness had the tainted sink. Stripped of his clothes, Hugh let his body drink at every thirsting pore, through trunk and limb. The elemental blessing solaced him, nor did he rise till vague with stellar light. The lone gulch, buttressing an arch of night, was like a temple to the Holy Ghost. As priests in slow procession with the host, a gusty breeze intoned, now low, now loud, and now as to the murmur of a crowd, yielding the dim-torched wonder of the nave. Aloft along the dusky architrave the wonder-tale of drifting stars evolved, and Hugh lay gazing till the whole resolved into a haze. It seemed that little Jim had come to share a merry fire with him, and there had been no trouble twixt the two. And Jamie listened eagerly while Hugh essayed a tangled tale of bears and men, breadroot and stars. But ever now and then the shifting smoke cloud dimmed the golden hair, the leal blue eyes, until, with sudden flare, the flame effaced them utterly, and lo, the gulch bank full with morning. Loath to go, Hugh lay beside the pool and pondered fate. He saw his age-long pilgrimage of hate stretch out, a fool's trail, and it made him cringe. For still amid the nightly vision's fringe his dull wit strayed, companioned with regret. But when the sun, a tilted cauldron set upon the gulch rim, poured a blaze of day, he rose and bathed again and went his way, sustaining wrath returning with the toil. At noon the gulch walls, hewn in lighter soil, fell back, and coulees dense with shrub and vine climbed zigzag to the sharp horizon line, whence one might choose the pilotage of crows. He laboured upward through the noonday doze of breathless shade, where plums were turning red, entangled bowers and grapevines overhead purpled with fruit to taunt the crawler's thirst. With little effort Hugh attained the first. The latter bargained sharply ere they sold their luscious clusters for the hoarded gold of strength that had so very much to buy. Now, having feasted, it was sweet to lie beneath a sunproof canopy, and sleep came swiftly. Hugh awakened to some deep star snuffing well of night, while he lay and wondered what had happened to the day, and where he was, and what were best to do. But when, fog-like, the drowse dispersed, he knew how far the rim above the plain stretched far to where the evening and the morning are, and that 'twere better he should crawl by night, sleep out the glare. With groping hands for sight, skyward along the broken steep he crawled, and saw at length, immense and purple-walled, or sensed the dusky mystery of plain. Gazing aloft, he found the capsized wain in mid-plunge down the polar steep. There too he set his back, and far ahead there grew, as some pale blossom from a darkling root, the star-blanched summit of a lonely butte, and thitherward he dragged his heavy limb. It seemed naught moved. Time hovered over him, an instant of incipient endeavour. 'Twas ever thus, and should be thus forever. This groping for the same armful of space, an insubstantial essence of one place, extentless on a weird frontier of sleep, sheer deep upon unfathomable deep. The flood of dusk bore down without a sound, as ocean on the spirits of the drowned, awakened headlong leagues beneath the light. So lapsed the drowsy aeon of the night, a strangely tensile moment in a trance, and then, as quickened to somnambulance, the heavens, imperceptibly in motion, were altered as the upward deeps of ocean diluted with a seepage of the moon. The boot-top, late a gossamer balloon in mid-air tethered, hovering, grew down and rooted in a blear expanse of brown that, lifting slowly with the ebb of night, took on the harsh solidity of light, and day was on the prairie like a flame. Scarce had he munched the hoarded roots when came a vertigo of slumber, snatchy dreams of sick pools, inaccessible cool streams, lured on through giddy vacancies of heat in swooping flights. Now hills of roasting meat made savoury the oven of the world, yet kept remote peripheries and whirled about a burning centre that was Hugh. Then all were gone save one, and it turned blue and was a heap of cool and luscious fruit, until at length he knew it for the boot, now mantled with a weaving of the gloam. It was the hour when cattle straggle home across the clearing in a hush of sleep. They saunter lowing, loiter belly deep amid the lush grass by the meadow stream. How like the sound of water in a dream, the intermittent tinkle of yon bell! A windlass creaks contentment from a well, and cool deeps gurgle as the bucket sinks. Now blowing at the trough the plough team drinks, the shaken harness rattles, sleepy quails call far, the warm milk hisses in the pails. There in the dusky barn lot crickets cry, the meadow twinkles with the glowing fly. One hears the horses munching at their oats. The green grows black, a veil of slumber floats across the haunts of home enamoured men. Some freak of memory brought back again the boyhood world of sight and scent and sound. It perished, and the prairie ringed him round. Blank as the face of fate, in listless mood, Hugh set his face against the solitude and met the night, the new moon, low and far, a frail cup tilted, nor the high-swung star, it seemed, might glint on any stream or spring, or touch with silver any toothsome thing. The coyote voiced the universal lack, as from a nether fire. The plain gave back the swelter of the noon glare to the gloom. In the hot hush Hugh heard his temples boom. Thirst tortured, motion was a languid pain. Why seek some further nowhere on the plain? Here might the coyotes feast as well as there. So spoke some loose-lipped spirit of despair. And still Hugh moved, volitionless, a weight submissive to that now unconscious hate, as darkling water to the hidden moon. And when the night wore on in middle swoon, the crawler, roused from stupor, was aware of some strange alteration in the air. To breathe became an act of conscious will. The starry waste was ominously still. The far-off coyote's yelp came sharp and clear as through a tunnel in the atmosphere. A ponderable, resonating mass, the limp leg dragging on the sun-dried grass, produced a sound unnaturally loud. Cranched, panting, Hugh looked up but saw no cloud. An oily film seemed spread upon the sky, now dully staring as the open eye of one in fever. Gasping, choked with thirst, a childish rage assailed Hugh, and he cursed. 'Twas like a broken spirit's outcry tossed upon hell's burlesque Sabbath for the lost. And briefly space seemed crowded with the voice. To wait and die, to move and die, what choice? Hugh chose not, yet he crawled, though more and more he felt the futile strife was nearly o'er. And as he went, a muffled rumbling grew, more felt than heard. For long it puzzled Hugh. Somehow 'twas coextensive with his thirst, yet boundless. Swollen blood veins ere they burst might give such warning, so he thought. And still the drone seemed heaping up a phonic hill that towered in a listening profound. Then suddenly a mountain peak of sound came toppling to a heaven-jolting fall. The prairie shuddered, and a raucous drawl ran far and perished in the outer deep. As one too roughly shaken out of sleep, Hugh stared bewildered. Still the face of night remained the same, save where upon his right the moon had vanished 'neath the prairie rim. Then suddenly the meaning came to him. He turned and saw athwart the northwest sky, like some black eyelid shutting on an eye, a coming night to which the night was day. Star-hungry, ranged in regular array, the lifting mass assailed the dragon's lair, submerged the region of the hounded bear, out-topped the tall ox-driver and the pole. And all the while there came a low-toned roll, less sound in air than tremor in the earth, from where, like flame upon a windy hearth, deep in the further murk sheet lightning flared. And still the southern arc of heaven stared, a half-shut eye, near blind with fever rheum. And still the plain lay tranquil as a tomb, wherein the dead reek not a menaced world. What turmoil now? Lo, ragged columns hurled pell-mell up stellar slopes. Swift blue fires leap above the wild assailants of the steep. Along the solid rear a dull boom runs, so light horse squadrons charge beneath the guns. Now once again the night is deathly still. What ghastly peace upon the zenith hill! No longer starry, not a sound is heard. So poised the hush, it seems a whispered word might loose all noises in an avalanche. Only the black mass moves, and far glooms blanch with fitful flashes. The capricious flare reveals the boot top tall and lonely there, like some grey prophet contemplating doom. But hark! What spirits whisper in the gloom? What sibilation of conspiracies ruffles the hush? Or murmuring of trees, ghosts of the ancient forest, or old rain in some hallucination of the plain? A frustrate phantom mourning all around. That ever-evolving, never-resolving sound gropes in the stifling hollow of the night. Then once, twice, thrice, a blade of blinding light ripped up the heavens, and the deluge came. A burst of wind and water, noise and flame, that hurled the watcher flat upon the ground. A moment past, Hugh, famished, now half drowned, he gasped for breath amid the hurtling drench. So might a testy god, long sought to quench a puny thirst, pour wassail, hurling after the crashing bowl with wild, sardonic laughter, to see man wrestle with his answered prayer. Prone to the roaring floor and ceaseless flare, the man drank deeply with the drinking grass, until it seemed the storm would never pass, but ravin down the painted murk for aye. When had what dreamer seen a glaring day, and leagues of prairie pantingly aquiver? Flame, flood, wind, noise, and darkness were a river tearing a cosmic channel to no sea. The tortured night wore on. Then suddenly peace fell. Remotely the retreating wrath trailed dull, reluctant thunders in its path, and up along a broken stare of cloud, the dawn came creeping whitely like a shroud. Grey vapours clung along the sudden plain. Uprose the sun to wipe the final stain of fury from the sky and drink the mist against a flawless arch of amethyst. The boot soared like a soul serene and white because of the catharsis of the night. All day Hugh fought with sleep and struggled on south-eastward, for the heavy heat was gone despite the naked sun. The blank northwest breathed coolly, and the crawler thought it best to move while yet each little break and hollow and shallow basin of the bison wallow begrudged the earth and air its dwindling store. But now that thirst was conquered more and more, he felt the gnaw of hunger like a rage, and once from dozing in a clump of sage a lone jack-rabbit bounded as a flame. Hope fled in Hugh until the memory came of him who robbed a sleeping friend and fled. Then hate and hunger merged. The man saw red, and momently the hare and little Jim were one blurred mark for murder unto him, elusive, taunting, sweet to clutch and tear. The rabbit paused to scan the crippled bear that ground its teeth as though it chewed a root. But when in witless rage Hugh drew his boot and hurled it with a curse, the hare loped off, its critic ears turned back as though to scoff at silly brutes that threw their legs away. Night like a shadow on enduring day swooped by. The dream of crawling and the act were phases of one everlasting fact. Hugh woke, and he was doing what he dreamed. The boot, outstripped at eventide, now seemed intent to follow. Ever now and then the crawler paused to calculate again what dear-bought yawn of distance dwarfed the hill. Close in the rear it soared, a Titan still, whose hand-in-pocket saunter kept the pace. Distinct along the southern rim of space a low ridge lay, the crest of the divide. What rest and plenty on the other side! Through what lush valleys ran what crystal brooks! And there in virgin meadows, wayside nooks with leaf and purple cluster dulled the light. All day it seemed that distant Pisgah height retreated, and the tall butte dogged the rear. At eve a striped gopher chirping near gave Hugh an inspiration. Now at least no thieving friend should rob him of a feast. His great idea stirred him as a shout. Off came a boot, a sock was ravelled out, the coarse yarn fashioned to a running snare. He placed about the gopher's hole with care, and then withdrew to hold the yarn and wait. The night-bound moments, ponderous with fate, crept slowly by. The battered grey face leered in expectation. Down the grizzled beard ran slaver from anticipating jaws. Evolving twilight hovered to a pause. The light wind fell. Again and yet again the man devoured his fancied prey, and then within the noose a timid snout was thrust. His hand unsteadied with the hunger lust, Hugh jerked the yarn. It broke. Down swooped the night, a shadow of despair. Bleak height on height it seemed, a sheer abyss enclosed him round. Clutching a strand of yarn, he heard the sound of some infernal turmoil under him. Grimly he strove to reach the ragged rim that snared a star, until the skiey space was darkened with a roof of Jamie's face. And then the yarn was broken and he fell, a tumble like a stricken bat. His yell woke hordes of laughers down the giddy yawn of that black pit. And suddenly 'twas dawn. Dream dawn, dream noon, dream twilight, yet possessed by one stern dream more clamorous than the rest. Hugh headed for a gap that notched the hills, where through a luring murmur of cool rills a haunting smell of verdure seemed to creep. By fits the wild adventure of his sleep became the cause of all his waking care, and he complained unto the empty air how Jamie broke the yarn. The sun and breeze had drunk all shallow basins to the lees, but now and then some gully choked with mud retained a turbid relict of the flood. Dream dawn, dream noon, dream night, and still obsessed by that one dream more clamorous than the rest, Hugh struggled for the crest of the divide. And when at length he saw the other side, 'twas but a rumpled waste of yellow hills. The deep-sunk wiser self had known the rills and nooks to be the facture of a whim, yet had the pleasant lie befriended him, and now the brutal fact had come to stare. Succumbing to a languorous despair, he mourned his fate with childish uncontrol, and nursed that deadly adder of the soul, self-pity. Let the crows sweep down and feed, aye, batten on a thing that died of need, a poor old wretch betrayed of God and man. So peevishly his broken musing ran, till glutted with the luxury of woe, he turned to see the boot, that he might know how little all his striving could avail against ill luck. And lo, a finger-nail at arm length could blot it out of space. A goading purpose and a creeping pace had dwarfed the Titan in a haze of blue. And suddenly new power came to Hugh with gazing on his masterpiece of will. So fare the wise on Pisgah. Down the hill unto the higher vision consecrate now sallied forth the new triumvirate, a weariness, a hunger, and a glory, 'gainst tyrannic chance. As in a story some higher Hugh observed the baser part, so sits the artist throned above his art, nor reeks the travail, so the end be fair. It seemed the wrinkled hells pressed in to stare, the arch of heaven was an eye agaze, and as Hugh went he fashioned many a phrase for use when, by some friendly ember light, his tale of things endured should speed the night, and all this gloom grow golden in the sharing. So wrought the old evangel of high daring, the duty and the beauty of endeavour, the privilege of going on for ever, a victor in the moment. Ah, but when the night slipped by and morning came again, the sky and hill were only sky and hill, and crawling but an agony of will. So once again the old triumvirate, a buzzard hunger and a viper hate, together with the baser part of Hugh went visionless. That day the wild geese flew, vague in a grey profundity of sky, and on into the night their muffled cry haunted the moonlight like a far farewell. It made Hugh homesick, though he could not tell for what he yearned, and in his fitful sleeping the cry became the sound of Jamie weeping, immeasurably distant. Morning broke, blear, chilly, through a fog that drove as smoke before the booming northwest. Sweet and sad came creeping back old visions of the lad, some trick of speech, some merry little lilt, the brooding blue of eyes too clear for guilt, the wind-blown golden hair. Hate slept that day, and half of Hugh was half a life away, a wandering spirit wistful of the past, and half went drifting with the autumn blast that mourned among the melancholy hills. For something of the lethargy that kills came creeping close upon the ebb of hate. Only the raw wind, like the lash of fate, could have availed to move him any more. At last the buzzard beak no longer tore his vitals, and he ceased to think of food. The fighter slumbered, and a maudlin mood foretold the dissolution of the man. He sobbed, and down his beard the big tears ran. And now the scene is changed. The bleak wind's cry becomes a flight of bullets snarling by, from where on yonder summit skulk the Rees. Against the sky in silhouette he sees the headstrong Jamie in the leaden rain, now serenely beautiful, and slain the dear lad lies within a gusty tent. Thus vexed with doleful whims the crawler went adrift before the wind, nor saw the trail till close on night he knew a rugged veil had closed about him, and a hush was there, though still a moaning in the upper air told how the grey winged gale blew out the day. Beneath a clump of brush he swooned away into an icy void, and waking numb, it seemed the still white dawn of death had come on this some cradle valley of the soul. He saw a dim enchanted hollow roll beneath him, and the brush thereof was fleece. And like the body of the perfect peace that thralled the whole abode the break of day, it seemed no wind had ever come that way, nor sound dwelt there, nor echo found the place. And Hugh lay lapped in wonderment a space, vexed with a snarl whereof the ends were lost, till shivering he wondered if a frost had fallen with the dying of the blast. So vaguely troubled, listlessly he cast a gaze about him. Lo, above his head the grey-green curtain of his chilly bed was broidered thick with plums, or so it seemed, for he was half persuaded that he dreamed, and with a steady stare he strove to keep that treasure for the other side of sleep. Returning hunger bade him rise. In vain he struggled with a fine spun mesh of pain that trammelled him, until a yellow stream of day flowed down the white veil of a dream, and left it disenchanted in the glare. Then warmed and soothed, Hugh rose and feasted there, and thought once more of reaching the Moreau. To southward with a painful pace and slow he went, stiff-jointed with a gnawing ache in that hip wound he had for Jamie's sake oft made him groan, nor wrought a tender mood the rankling weapon of ingratitude was turned again with every puckering twinge. Far down the vale a narrow winding fringe of wilted green betokened how a spring there sent a little rill meandering. And Hugh was greatly heartened, for he knew what fruits and herbs might flourish in the slough, and thirst henceforth should torture not again. So day on day, despite the crawler's pain, all in the windless golden autumn weather, these two as comrades struggled south together, the homeless greybeard and the homing rill. And one was sullen with the lust to kill, and one went crooning of the moon-wooed vast. For each the many-fathomed peace at last, but oh, the boon of singing on the way. So came these in the golden fall of day unto a sudden turn in the ravine, wherefrom Hugh saw a flat of cluttered green beneath the further bluffs of the Moreau. With sinking heart he paused and gazed below upon the goal of so much toil and pain. Yon green had seemed a paradise to gain, the while he thirsted where the lonely butte looked far and saw no toothsome herb or fruit in all that yellow barren dim with heat. But now the wasting body cried for meat, and sickness was upon him. Game should pass, nor deign to fear the mighty hunter Glass, but curiously sniffing paused to stare. Now while thus musing, Hugh became aware of some low murmur, phasic and profound, scarce risen over the border line of sound. It might have been the coursing of his blood, or thunder heard remotely, or a flood flung down a wooded valley far away. Yet that had been no weather-breeding day. 'Twould frost that night. Amid the thirsty land all streams ran thin, and when he pressed a hand on either ear, the world seemed very still. The deep-worn channel of the little rill here fell away to eastward, rising rough with old rain furrows to a lofty bluff that faced the river with a yellow wall. There too, perplexed, Hugh set about to crawl, nor reached the summit till the sun was low, far spread, shade dimpled. In the level glow the still land told not whence the murmur grew, but where the green strip melted into blue, far down the winding valley of the stream, Hugh saw what seemed the tempest of a dream, at mimic havoc in the timber glooms, as from the sweeping of gigantic brooms a dust cloud deepened down the dwindling river. Upon the distant treetops ran a shiver, and huddled thickets writhed as in a gale. On creeps the windless tempest up the vale, the while the murmur deepens to a roar, as with the wider yawning of a door. And now the agitated green gloom gapes to belch a flood of countless dusky shapes that mill and wrangle in a turbid flow, migrating myriads of the buffalo bound for the winter pastures of the Platte. Exhausted, faint with need of meat, Hugh sat and watched the mounting of the living flood. Down came the night, and like a blot of blood the lopped moon weltered in the dust-bleared east. Sleep came and gave a Barmecidal feast. About a merry flame were simmering sweet haunches of the calving of the spring, and tender tongues that never tasted snow, and marrow bones that yielded to a blow such treasure. Hugh awoke with gnashing teeth, and heard the mooing drone of cows beneath, the roll of hoofs, the challenge of the bull. So sounds a freshet when the banks are full, and bursting brush jams bellow to the croon of water through green leaves. The ragged moon now drenched the valley in an eerie rain. Below, the semblance of a hurricane, above the perfect calm of brooding frost, through which the wolves in doleful tension tossed from hill to hill the ancient hunger song. In broken sleep Hugh rolled the chill night long, half conscious of the flowing flesh below. And now he trailed a bison in the snow that deepened till he could not lift his feet. Again he battled for a chunk of meat with some grey beast that fought with icy fang, and when he woke the wolves no longer sang. White dawn athwart a white world smote the hill, and thunder rolled along the valley still. Morn, wiping up the frost as with a sponge, day on the steep and down the nightward plunge, and twilight saw the myriads moving on. Dust to the westward where the van had gone, and dust and muffled thunder in the east. Hugh starved while gazing on a Titan feast. The tons of beef that eddied there and swirled had stilled the crying hungers of the world, yet not one little morsel was for him. The red sun, pausing on the dusty rim, induced a panic aspect of his plight. The herd would vanish and pass in the night, and be another dream to cling and flout. Now scanning all the summit round about, amid the rubble of the ancient drift, he saw a boulder. 'Twas too big to lift, yet he might roll it. Painfully and slow he worked it to the edge, then let it go, and breathlessly expectant watched it fall. It hurtled down the leaning yellow wall, and bounding from a brushy ledge's brow, it barely grazed the buttocks of a cow, and made a moment's eddy where it struck. In peevish wrath Hugh cursed his evil luck, and seizing rubble gave his fury vent by pelting bison till his strength was spent. So might a child assail the crowding sea. Then sick at heart and musing bitterly, he shambled down the steep way to the creek, and having stayed the tearing buzzard beak with breadroot, and the waters of the rill slept till the white of morning over the hill was like a whisper groping in a hush. The stream's low trill seemed loud. The tumbled brush and rumpled treetops in the flat below, upon a fog that clung like spectral snow, lay motionless, nor any sound was there. No frost had fallen, but the crystal air smacked of the autumn, and a heavy dew lay hoar upon the grass. There came on Hugh a picture, vivid in the moment's thrill, of marshalled corn shocks marching up a hill, and spiked fields dotted with the pumpkin's gold. It vanished, and a shiver with the cold he brooded on the mockeries of chance, the shrewd malignity of circumstance that either gave too little or too much. Yet with the fragment of a hope for crutch his spirit rallied, and he rose to go, though each stiff joint resisted as a foe, and that old hip wound battled with his will. So down along the channel of the rill unto the vale below he fought his way. The frore fog, rifting in the risen day, revealed the havoc of the living flood. The river shallows beaten into mud, the slender saplings shattered in the crush, all lower leafage stripped, the tousled brush despoiled of fruitage, winter thin, aghast. And where the avalanche of hoofs had passed, it seemed nor herb nor grass had ever been. And this the hard-won paradise, wherein a food-devouring plethora of food had come to make a starving solitude. Yet hope and courage mounted with the sun. Surely, Hugh thought, some ill-begotten one of all that striving mass had lost the strife, and perished in the headlong stream of life, a feast to fill the bellies of the strong, that still the weak might perish. All day long he struggled down the stricken vale, nor saw what thing he sought. But when the twilight awe was creeping in, beyond a bend arose a din, as though the coyotes and the crows fought there with shrill and raucous battle cries. Small need had Hugh to ponder and surmise what guerdon beak and fang contended for. Within himself the oldest cause of war brought forth upon the instant fang and beak. He too would fight, nor had he far to seek amid the driftwood strewn about the sand for weapons suited to a brawny hand with such a purpose. Armed with club and stone he forged ahead into the battle zone, and from a screening thicket spied his foes. He saw a bison carcass, black with crows, and over it a welter of black wings, and round about a press of tawny rings that, like a muddy current churned to foam upon a snag, flashed whitely in the gloam with naked teeth, while close about the prize red beaks and muzzles, bloody to the eyes, betrayed how worth a struggle was the feast. Then came on Hugh the fury of the beast, to eat or to be eaten. Better so, to die contending with a living foe, than fight the yielding distance and the lack. Masked by the brush, he opened the attack, and ever where a stone or club fell true about the stricken one, an uproar grew, and brute tore brute, forgetful of the prey, until the whole pack tumbled in the fray, with bleeding flanks and lacerated throats. Then, as the leader of a host who notes the cannon-wrought confusion of the foe, Hugh seized the moment for a daring blow. The wolf's a coward who, in goodly packs, may counterfeit the courage that he lacks, and with a craven's fury crush the bold. But when the disunited mass that rolled in suicidal strife became aware how some great beast that shambled like a bear bore down with roaring challenge, fell a hush upon the pack, some slinking to the brush with tails adroop, while some that whined in pain writhed off on reddened trails with bristled mane. Before the flying stones a bolder few snarled menace at the foe as they withdrew, to fill the outer dusk with clamourings. Aloft, upon a moaning wind of wings, the crows with harsh vituperative cries Now saw a grey wolf of prodigious size, devouring with the frenzy of the starved. Thus felt Hugh a bison, killed and carved. And so fate's whims mysteriously trend. Woe in the silken meshes of the friend, weal in the might and menace of the foe. But with the fading of the afterglow, the routed wolves found courage to return. Amid the brush Hugh saw their eyeballs burn, and well he knew how futile stick and stone should prove by night to keep them from their own. Better is less with safety than enough with ruin. He retreated to a bluff, and scarce had reached it when the pack swooped in upon the carcass. All night long the din of wrangling wolves assailed the starry air, while high above them in a brushy lair Hugh dreamed of gnawing at the bloody feast. Along about the blanching of the east, when sleep is weirdest and a moment's flight remembered coextensive with the night may teem with hapful years, as light in smoke upon the jumble of Hugh's dreaming broke a buzz of human voices. Once again he rode the westward trail with Henry's men, hoof-smitten leagues consuming in a dust. And now the nightmare of that broken trust was on him, and he lay beside the spring, a corpse, yet heard the muffled parleying above him of the looters of the dead. But when he might have riddled what they said, the babble flattened to a blur of grey, and lo, upon a bleak frontier of day, the spent moon staring down a little space, Hugh scrutinized the featureless white face as though 'twould speak. But when again the sound grew up and seemed to come from underground, he cast the drowse and, peering down the slope, beheld what set at grapple fear and hope 3 Indian horsemen riding at a jog, their ponies wading belly deep in fog that clung along the valley, seemed to swim, and through a thinner vapour, moving dim, the men were ghostlike. Could they be the Sioux? Almost the wish became belief in Hugh. Or were they Rees? As steadily the doubt withheld him from the hazard of a shout, and while he followed them with baffled gaze, grown large and vague, dissolving in the haze, they vanished westward. Knowing well the wont of Indians moving on the bison hunt, forthwith Hugh guessed the early riders were the outflung feelers of a tribe astir. Like some huge cat gone mousing, so he lay, concealed, impatient with the sleepy day that dawdled in the dawning. Would it bring good luck or ill? His eager questioning, as crawling fog took on a golden hue. From sunrise he was waiting for the Sioux, their parfleche panniers fat with sun-dried maize and wasna. From the mint of evil days he would coin tales and be no begging guest about the tribal feast fires burning west, but kinsman of the blood of daring men. And when the crawler stood erect again, O friend betrayer at the bighorn's mouth, beware of someone riding from the south to do the deed that he had lived to do. Now when the sun stood hour high in the blue, from where a cloud of startled blackbirds rose, downstream a panic tumult broke the doze of windless morning. What unwelcome news embroiled the parliament of feathered shrews? A boiling cloud against the sun they lower, flackering strepent, now a sooty shower. Big flaked, squall-driven westward, down they flutter to set a clump of cottonwoods a-sputter with cold black fire. And once again some shock of sight or sound flings panic in the flock, grey boughs exploding in a ruck of birds. What augury in orniscopic words did yon swart sibyls on the morning scrawl? Now broke abruptly through the clacking brawl a camp dog's barking and a pony's neigh, whereat a running nicker fled away, attenuating to a rearward hush. And lo, in hailing distance round the brush that fringed a jutting bluff space like a beard upon a stubborn chin outthrust, appeared a band of mounted warriors. In their van, aloof and lonely, rode a gnarled old man upon a piebald stallion. Stooped was he beneath his heavy years, yet haughtily he wore them like the purple of a king. Keen for a goal, as from the driving string a barbed and feathered arrow truly sped, his face was like a flinty arrowhead, and brooded westward in a steady stare. There was a sift of winter in his hair, the bleakness of brown winter in his look. Hugh saw, and huddled closer in his nook, fled the bright dreams of safety, feast and rest before that keen, cold brooder on the west, as gaudy leaves before the blizzard flee. 'Twas Elk Tongue, fighting chieftain of the trail of hunger. On they came in ravelled rank, and many a haggard eye and hollow flank made plain how close and piteously pressed the enemy that drove them to the west, such foemen as no warrior ever slew. A tale of cornfields plundered by the Sioux their sagging panniers told, yet rich enough they seemed to him who watched them from the bluff, yea, pampered nigh the limit of desire. No friend had filched from them the boon of fire and hurled them shivering back upon the beast. Erect they went, full armed to strive at least, and nightly in a cosy ember glow hope fed them with a dream of buffalo soon to be overtaken. After that, home with their Pawnee cousins on the Platte, much meat and merry-making till the spring. On dragged the rabble like a fraying string too tautly drawn. The richen ponies rode, for much is light and little is a load among all heathen with no Christ to save. Grey seekers for the yet begrudging grave, bent with the hoeing of forgotten maize. Wood-hewers, water-bearers, all their days toiled neath the lifelong hoarding of their packs. And nursing squaws, their babies at their backs, whining because the milk they got was thinned in dugs of famine, strove as with a wind invincibly equipped with their first bows. The striplings strutted, knowing as youth knows how fair life is beyond the beckoning blue. Cold-eyed, the grandsires plodded, for they knew as frosted heads may know how all trails merge in what lone land. Raw maidens on the verge of some half-guessed-at mystery of life, in wistful emulation of the wife, stooped to the fancied burden of the race, nor read upon the withered grandam's face the scrawled tale of that burden and its woe. Slant to the sagging poles of the travaux, numb to the squaw's harsh railing and the goad, the lean cayuses toiled, and children rode atop the household plunder, wonder-eyed to see a world flow by on either side, from blue air sprung to vanish in blue air, a river of enchantments. Here and there the camp-curs loped upon a vexing quest where countless hooves had left a palimpsest, a taunting snarl of broken sense. And now they sniffed the clean bones of the bison cow, howled to the skies, and now with manes arough they nosed the man-smell leading to the bluff. Pause puzzled at the base and sweep the height with questioning yelps. Aloft, crouched low in fright, already Hugh can hear the braves' guffaws at their scorned foemen yielded to the squaw's inverted mercy and a slow-won grave. Since Earth's first mother scolded from a cave and that dear riddle of her love began, no man has wrought a weapon against man to match the deadly venom brewed above the lean blue, blinding heart-fires of her love. Well might the hunted hunter shrink aghast, but thrice 3 seasons yet should swell the past. So was it writ, ere fate's keen harriers should run Hugh Glass to earth. The hungry curs took up again the tangled scent of food. Still flowed the rabble through the solitude, a thinning stream now of the halt, the weak, and all who had not very far to seek for that weird pass whereto the fleet are slow. And out of it keen winds and numbing blow, shrill with the fleeing voices of the dead. Slowly the scattered stragglers, making head against their weariness, as up a steep fled westward, and the morning lay asleep upon the valley, fallen wondrous still. Hugh kept his nook, nor ventured forth until the high day toppled to a blue descent, when thirst became a master, and he went with painful scrambling down the broken scarp, lured by the stream that like a smitten harp rippled a muted music to the sun. Scarce had he crossed the open flat and won the halfway fringe of willows when he saw, slow plodding up the trail, a tottering squaw, whose years made big the little pack she bore. Crouched in the brush, Hugh watched her. More and more the little burden tempted him. Why not? A thin cry throttled in that lonely spot could bring no succour. None should ever know, save him, the feasted coyote and the crow, why one poor crone found not the midnight fire. Nor would the vanguard, quick with young desire, devouring distance westward like a flame, regret this ash-dropped rearward. On she came, slow-footed, staring blankly on the sand, so close now that it needed but a hand out-thrust to overthrow her. Ay, to win that priceless spoil, a little tent of skin, a flint and steel, a kettle and a knife. What did the dying with the means of life, that thus the fit to live should suffer lack? Poised for the lunge, what whimsy held him back? Why did he gaze upon the passing prize, nor seize it? Did some gust of ghostly cries awaken round her? whisperings of eld, wraith voices of the babies she had held to plead for pity on her gravewood days. Far down a moment's cleavage in the haze of backward years, Hugh saw her now, nor saw the little burden and the feeble squaw, but someone sitting haloed like a saint beside a hearth long cold. The dream grew faint, and when he looked again, the crone was gone beyond a clump of willow. Crawling on, he reached the river, leaning to a pool, calm in its cup of sand. He saw a fool, a wild wry mask of mirth, a grin yet grim, rose there to claim identity with him and ridicule his folly. Pity? For who pitied this that it should spare a squaw spent in the spawning of a scorpion brood? He drank and hastened down the solitude, fleeing that thing which fleered him and was Hugh. And as he went, his self-accusing grew, and with it anger, till it came to seem that somehow some sly Jamie of a dream had plundered him again, and he was strong with lust of vengeance and the sting of wrong, so that he travelled faster than for days. Now when the eve in many shaded greys wove the day's shroud, and through the lower lands lean fog-arms groped with chilling spirit hands, he paused perplexed, elusive, haunting, dim, as though some memory that stirred in him, invasive of the real, outgrew the dream. There came upon the breeze that stole up stream a whiff of wood smoke. Twixt a beat and beat of Hugh's deluded heart, it seemed the sweet allure of home. A brief way, and one came upon the clearing where the sumac flame ran round the forest fringe, and just beyond one saw the slough grass nodding in the pond unto the sleepy troll the bullfrogs sung. And then one saw the place where one was young, the log house, sitting on a stumpy rise, half lit within. Its windows were as eyes that love much and are faded with old tears. It seemed regretful of a life's arrears, yet patient, with a self-denying poise, like some old mother for her bearded boys, waiting sweet-hearted and a little sad. So briefly dreamed a recrudescent lad beneath grey hairs, and fled through chill and damp. Still groped the odour, hinting at a camp, a two-tongued herald wooing hope and fear. Was hospitality or danger near? A Sioux war party hot upon the trail, or laggard Rees? Hugh crawled across the vale, toiled up along a zigzag gully's bed, and reached a bluff's top. In a smudge of red the west burned low, hill summits yet alight, and pools of gloom anticipating night mottled the landscape to the dull blue rim. What freak of fancy had imposed on him? Could one smell home smoke 50 years away? He saw no fire. No pluming spire of grey rose in the dimming air to woo or warm. He lay upon the bare height, fagged, forlorn, and old times came upon him with the creep of subtle drugs that put the will to sleep and wreak doom to the soothing of a dream. So listlessly he scanned the sombrous stream, scarce seeing what he scanned. The dark increased, a chill wind wakened from the frowning east and soughed along the vale. Then with a start he saw what broke the torpor of his heart and set the wild blood free. From where he lay, an easy point-blank rifle shot away, appeared a mystic germinating spark that in some secret garden of the dark upreared a frail blue nodding stem whereon a ruddy lily flourished and was gone. What miracle was this? Again it grew, the scarlet blossom on the stem of blue, and withered back again into the night. With pounding heart Hugh crawled along the height and reached a point of vantage whence below he saw capricious witch-lights dim and glow like far-spent embers quickened in a breeze. 'Twas surely not a camp of laggard Rees, nor yet of Siouan warriors hot in chase. Dusk and a quiet bivouacked in that place, a doddering vagrant with numb hands. The wind fumbled the dying ashes there and whined. It was the day-old campground of the foe. Glad-hearted now, Hugh gained the vale below, keen to possess once more the ancient gift. Nearing the glow, he saw vague shadows lift out of the painted gloom of smouldering logs, distorted bulks that bristled and were dogs, snarling at this invasion of their lair. Hugh charged upon them, growling like a bear, and sent them whining. Now again to view the burgeoning of scarlet, gold, and blue, the immemorial miracle of fire. From heaped-up twigs a tenuous, smoky spire arose and made an altar of the place. The spark-glow, faint upon the grizzled face, transformed the kneeling outcast to a priest, and, native of the light begetting east, the wind became a chanting acolyte. These two, entempled in the vaulted night, breathed conjuries of interwoven breath. Then hark! The snapping of the chains of death from dead wood. Lo! the epiphanic god. Once more the freightage of the fennel rod dissolved the chilling pall of Jovian scorn. The wonder of the resurrection morn, the face apocalyptic, and the sword, the glory of the many-symboled Lord. Hugh, lifting up his eyes about him, saw, and something in him, like a vernal thaw voiced with the sound of many waters, ran and quickened to the laughter of a man. Light-heartedly he fed the singing flame and took its blessing, till a soft sleep came with dreaming that was like a pleasant tale. The far white dawn was peering up the vale when he awoke to indolent content. A few shorn stars, in pale astonishment, were huddled westward, and the fire was low. 3 scrawny camp-curs mustered in a row beyond the heap of embers, heads askew, ears pricked to question what the man might do, sat wistfully regardant. He arose, and they, grown canny in a school of blows, skulked to a safer distance, there to raise a dolorous chanting of the evil days, their grey breath like the body of a prayer. Hugh nursed the sullen embers to a flare, then set about to view an empty camp as once before. But now no smoky lamp of blear suspicion searched a gloom of fraud, wherein a smirking friendship like a board embraced a coward safety. Now no grief twixt hideous revelation and belief made womanish the man, but glad to strive, with hope to nerve him and a will to drive, he knew that he could finish in the race. The staring impassivity of space no longer mocked the dreadful skyward climb, where distance seemed identical with time, was past now, and that mystic something, luck, without which worth may flounder in the ruck, had turned to him again. So flame-like sword rekindled hope in him as he explored among the ash-heaps, and the lean dogs ran and barked about him for the love of man, wistful yet fearing. Surely he could find some trifle in the hurry left behind, or haply hidden in the trampled sand, that to the cunning of a needy hand should prove the master key of circumstance. For 'tis the little gifts of grudging chance, well husbanded, make victors. Long he sought without avail, and crawling back he thought of how the dogs were growing less afraid, and how one might be skinned without a blade. A flake of flint might do it, he would try, and then he saw. Or did the servile eye trick out a mental image like the real? He saw a glimmering of whetted steel beside a heap now washed with morning light. Scarce more of marvel and the sense of might moved Arthur when he reached a hand to take the fay-wrought brand emerging from the lake, whereby a kingdom should be lopped of strife. Then Hugh now, pouncing on a trader's knife worn hollow in the use of bounteous days. And now, behold a rich man by the blaze of his own hearth, a lord of steel and fire, not having but the measure of desire determines wealth, who gaining more seek most, are ever the pursuers of a ghost, and lend their fleetness to the fugitive. For Hugh, long goaded by the wish to live, what gauge of mastery in fire and tool, that twain wherewith time put the brute to school, evolving man, the maker and the seer. Twixt urging hunger and restraining fear, the gaunt dogs hovered round the man, while he cajoled them in the language of the Ree, and simulated feeding them with sand, until the boldest dared to sniff his hand bare-fanged, and with conciliative whine through bristled mane the quick blade bit the spine below the skull, and as a flame-struck thing the body humped and shuddered, withering, the lank limbs huddled, wilted. Now to skin the carcass, dig a hole, arrange therein, and fix the pelt with stakes, the flesh side up. This done, he shaped the bladder to a cup on willow withes, and filled the rawhide pot with water from the river, made it hot with roasted stones, and set the meat a-boil. Those days of famine and prodigious toil had wrought bulimic cravings in the man, and scarce the cooking of the flesh outran the eating of it. As a fed flame towers, according to the fuel it devours, his hunger with indulgence grew, nor ceased, until the kettle, empty of the feast, went dim. The sky and valley, merging, swirled in subtle smoke that smothered out the world. Hugh slept, and then, as diverse mounting sunder a murmuring murk to blink him sudden wonder upon a dazzling upper deep of blue, he rose again to consciousness, and knew the low sun beating slantly on his face. Now indolently gazing round the place, he noted how the curls had revelled there, the bones and entrails gone, some scattered hair alone remaining of the pot of hide. How strange He had not heard them at his side, and granting but one afternoon had passed, what could have made the fire burn out so fast? Had daylight waned, night fallen, morning crept, noon blazed, a new day dwindled while he slept? And was the friend-like fire a Jamie too? Across the twilight consciousness of Hugh the old obsession like a wounded bird fluttered. He got upon his knees and stirred the feathery ash, but not a spark was there. Already with the failing sun the air went keen, betokening a frosty night. Hugh winced with something like the clutch of fright. How could he bear the torture? How sustain the sting of that antiquity of pain rolled back upon him, face again the foe, that yielding victor, fleet in being slow, that huge impersonal malevolence? So readily the tentacles of sense root in the larger standard of desire, that Hugh fell farther in the loss of fire than in the finding of it he arose. And suddenly the place grew strange as grows a friend's house when the friend is on his bier, and all that was familiar there and dear puts on a blank, inhospitable look. Hugh set his face against the east and took that dreariest of ways, the trail of flight. He would outcrawl the shadow of the night and have the day to blanket him in sleep. But as he went to meet the gloom, a creep bemused with life's irrational rebuffs, a yelping of the dogs among the bluffs rose, hunger-whetted, stabbing, rent the pall of evening silence, blunted to a drawl amid the arid waterways, and died. And as the echo to the sound replied, so in the troubled mind of Hugh was wrought a reminiscent cry of thought to thought that, groping, found an unlocked door to life. The dogs, keen flint to skin one, then the knife, discovered. Why, that made a flint and steel! No further with the subtle foe at heel he fled, for all about him in the rock, to waken when the needy hand might knock, a saviour slept. He found a flake of flint, scraped from his shirt a little wad of lint, spilled on it from the smitten stone a shower of ruddy seed, and saw the mystic flower that genders its own summer bloom anew. And so capricious luck came back to Hugh, and he was happier than he had been since Jamie to that unforgiven sin had yielded ages back upon the grand. Now he would turn the cunning of his hand to carving crutches, that he might arise, be manlike, lift more rapidly the skies that crouched between his purpose and the mark. The warm glow housed him from the frosty dark, and there he wrought in very joyous mood, and sang by fits, whereat the solitude set laggard singers snatching at the tune. The gaunter for their hunt, the dogs came soon to haunt the shaken fringes of the glow, and, pitching voices to the timeless woe, outwailed the lilting. So the chorus sings of terror, pity, and the tears of things when most the doomed protagonist is gay. The stars swarmed over, and the front of day whitened above a white world, and the sun rose on a sleeper with a task well done, nor roused him till its burning topped the blue. When Hugh awoke, there woke a younger Hugh, now half a stranger, and 'twas good to feel with ebbing sleep the old green vigour steal thrilling along his muscles and his veins, as in a lull of winter cleansing rains the grey bough quickens to the sap a creep. It chanced the dogs lay near him, sound asleep, curled nose to buttock in the noonday glow. He killed the larger with a well-aimed blow, skinned, dressed, and set it roasting on a spit, and when 'twas cooked, ate sparingly of it, for need might yet make little seem a feast. Fording the river shallows, south by east, he hobbled now along a withered rill that issued where old floods had gashed the hill, a cyclopean portal yawning sheer. No storm of countless hoofs had entered here. It seemed a place where nothing ever comes but change of season. He could hear the plums plash in the frosted thicket over lush, while, like a spirit lisping in the hush, the crisp leaves whispered round him as they fell, and ever now and then the autumn spell was broken by an ululating cry. From far way back, with muzzle to the sky, the lone dog followed mourning. Darkness came, and huddled up beside a cosy flame, Hugh's sleep was but a momentary flight across a little shadow into light. So day on day he toiled, and when afloat above the sunset like a Stygian boat, the new moon bore the sceptre of the old, he saw a dwindling strip of blue outrolled the valley of the tortuous Cayenne, and ere the half-moon sailed the night again, those far lone leagues had sloughed their garb of blue, and dwindled after Hugh, until he saw that Titan of the plains, the sinewy Missouri. Dearth of rains had made the giant gaunt as he who saw. This loud chain smasher of a late March thaw seemed never to have bellowed at his banks. And yet, with staring ribs and hollow flanks, the urge of an indomitable will proclaimed him of the breed of giants still. And where the current ran a boiling track, 'twas like the muscles of a mighty back grown Atlantean in the wrestler's craft. Hugh set to work and built a little raft of driftwood bound with grapevines. So it fell that one with an amazing tale to tell came drifting to the gates of Kiowa. End of part 3. Recorded by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. Part 4 of The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. Part 4. The Return of the Ghost. Not long Hugh let the lust of vengeance gnaw upon him idling, though the tale he told and what report proclaimed him were as gold to buy a winter's comfort at the post. I cannot rest, for I am but the ghost of someone murdered by a friend, he said, so long as yonder traitor thinks me dead, ay, buried in the bellies of the crows and coyotes. Whereupon said one of those who heard him, noting how the old man shook as with a chill, God fend that one should look with such a blizzard of a face for me. For he went greyer, like a poplar tree that shivers, ruffling to the first faint breath of storm, while yet the world is still as death, save where far off the kennelled thunders bay. So brooding, he grew stronger day by day, until at last he laid the crutches by, and then one evening came a rousing cry from where the year's last keelboat hove in view. Around the bend its swarthy, sweating crew slant to the shouldered line. Men sang that night in Kiowa, and by the ruddy light of leaping fires amid the wooden walls the cups went round, and there were merry brawls of bearded lads no older for the beard, and laughing stories vied with tales of weird by stream and prairie trail and mountain pass, until the tipsy bourgeois bawled for glass to shame these with a man's tale fit to hear. The greybeard, sitting where the light was blear, with little heart for revelry, began his story, told as of another man who, loving late, loved much and was betrayed. He spoke unwitting how his passion played upon them, how their eyes grew soft or hard with what he told. Yet something of the bard he seemed, and his the purpose that is art's, whereby men make a vintage of their hearts, and with the wine of beauty deaden pain. Low-toned, insistent as October rain, his voice beat on, and now and then would flit across the melancholy grey of it a glimmer of cold fire that, like the flare of soundless lightning, showed a world made bare, green summer slain and all its leafage stripped. And bronze jaws tightened, brawny hands were gripped, as though each hearer had a fickle friend. But when the old man might have made an end, rounding the story to a peaceful close, at Kiowa, song-like, his voice arose, the grinning grey mask lifted, and the eyes burned as a bard's who sees and prophesies, conning the future as a time long gone. Swaying to rhythm, the dizzy tale plunged on, even to the cutting of the traitor's throat, and ceased, as though a bloody strangling smote the voice of that grey chanter, drunk with doom. And there was shuddering in the blue-smeared gloom of fallen fires. It seemed the deed was done before their eyes who heard. The morrow's sun lay over leagues of frost-enchanted plain, saw Glass upon his pilgrimage again, northbound as hunter for the keelboat's crew. And many times the wide autumnal blue burned out and darkened to a deep of stars, and still they toiled among the snags and bars, those lean upstream men straining at the rope, lashed by the doubt and strengthened by the hope of backward winter. Engines wrought of bone and muscle, panting for the Yellowstone, bend after bend, and yet more bends away. Now was the river like a sandy bay at ebb tide, and the far-off cut-bank's boom mocked them in shallows. Now 'twas like a flume with which the toilers, barely creeping, strove. and bend by bend the selfsame poplar grove, set on the selfsame headland, so it seemed, confronted them, as though they merely dreamed of passing one drear point. So on and up, past where the tawny Titan gulps the cup of Cain waters, past the Morrow's mouth, and still Rye League and Stubborn League fell south, becoming haze and weary memory. Then past the empty lodges of the Ree that gaped at cornfields plundered by the Sioux. And their old times came mightily on Hugh, for much of him was born and buried there. Some troubled glory of that wind-tossed hair was on the trampled corn. The lonely skies, so haunted with the blue of Jamie's eyes, seemed taunting him, and through the frosted wood along the flat where once their tent had stood a chill wind sorrowed, and the blackbird's brawl amid the funeral torches of the fall ran raucously, a desecrating din. Past where the cannon ball and heart came in they laboured. Now the northwest woke at last, the gaunt bluffs bellowed back the trumpet blast of charging winds that made the sandbars smoke. To breathe now was to gulp fine sand and choke. The stinging air was sibilant with whips, leaning the more, and with the firmer grips still northward the embattled toilers pressed to where the river yaws into the west. There stood the Mandan village. Now began the chaining of the Titan. Drift ice ran, the winged hounds of winter ceased to bay. The stupor of a doom completed lay upon the world. The biting darkness fell. Out in the night, resounding as a well, they heard the deck planks popping in a vice of frost. All night the smithies of the ice re-echoed with the grinding jar and clink of ghostly hammers welding link to link, and morning found the world without a sound. There lay the stubborn prairie Titan, bound to wait the far-off Heraclean thaw. Though still in silent rage, he strove to gnaw the ragged shackles knitting at his breast. And so the boatman won a winter's rest among the Mandan traders. But for Hugh there yet remained a weary work to do across the naked country, west by south. His purpose called him at the Big Horn's mouth, 300 miles of winging for the Crow. But by the river trail that he must go, 'twas 700 winding miles at least. So now he turned his back upon the feast, snug ease, the pleasant tale, the merry mood, and took the barefoot sounding solitude northwestward. Long they watched him from the post, skied on a bluff rim, fading like a ghost at grey cockcrow, and hooded in his breath. He seemed indeed a fugitive from death, on whom some tatter of the shroud still clung. Blank space engulfed him. Now the moon was young when he set forth, and day by day he strode his scarce healed wounds upon him like a load, and dusk by dusk his fire outflared the moon that waxed until it wrought a spectral noon at nightfall. Then he came to where a whirl with spring's wild rage, the snowborn Titan girl, a skiey wonder on her virgin face, receives the virile Yellowstone's embrace and bears the lusty seeker for the sea. A bleak, horizon-wide serenity clung round the valley where the twain lay dead. A winding sheet was on the marriage bed. 'Twas warmer now, the sky grew overcast, and as Hugh strode southwestward, all the vast grey void seemed suddenly astir with wings and multitudinary whisperings, the muffled sibilance of tumbling snow. It seemed no more might living waters flow, moon gleam, star glint, dawn smoulder through, birds sing, or ever any fair familiar thing be so again. The outworn winds were furled, weird weavers of the twilight of a world, wrought, thread on kissing thread, the web of doom, grown insubstantial in the knitted gloom. The bluffs loomed eerie, and the scanty trees were dwindled to remote dream traceries that never might be green or shield a nest. All day with swinging stride Hugh forged southwest along the Yellowstone's smooth paven stream, a dream shape moving in a troubled dream. And all day long the whispering weavers wove, and close on dark he came to where a grove of cottonwoods rose tall and shadow thin against the northern bluffs. He camped therein, and with cut boughs made shelter as he might. Close pressed the blackness of the snow-choked night about him, and his fire of plumwood purred. Athwart a soft penumbral drowse he heard the tumbling snowflakes sighing all around, till sleep transformed it to a summer sound of boyish memory, susurrant bees, the south wind in the tousled apple trees, and slumber flowing from their leafy gloom. He wakened to the cottonwood's deep boom. Black fury was the world. The northwest's roar was of a surf upon a shipwreck shore. Plunged high above him from the sheer bluff's verge, and like the backward sucking of the surge, far fled the sobbing of the wild snow spray. Black blindness grew white blindness, and 'twas day. All being now seemed narrowed to a span that held a sputtering wood fire and a man. Beyond was tumult and a whirling maze. The trees were but a roaring in a haze. The sheer bluff wall that took the blizzard's charge was thunder flung along the hidden marge of chaos, stridden by the ghost of light. White blindness grew black blindness, and 'twas night, wherethrough nor moon nor any star might grope. 2 days since, Hugh had killed an antelope, and what remained sufficed the time of storm. The snow banked round his shelter kept him warm, and there was wood to burn for many a day. The third dawn, oozing through a smudge of grey, awoke him. It was growing colder fast. Still from the bluff high over boomed the blast, but now it took the void with numbing wings. By noon the woven mystery of things frayed raggedly, and through a sudden rift at length Hugh saw the beetling bluff wall lift a sturdy shoulder to the flying rack. Slowly the sense of distances came back, as with the waning day the great wind fell. The pale sun set upon a frozen hill. The wolves howled. Hugh had left the Mandan town when heifer horned the maiden moon lies down beside the sea of evening. Now she rose, scar-faced and staring blankly on the snows, while yet the twilight tarried in the west. And more she came a tardy guest as Hugh pushed onward through the frozen waste, until she stole on midnight, shadow-faced, a haggard spectre, then no more appeared. 'Twas on that time the man of hoary beard paused in the early twilight, looming lone upon a bluff rim of the Yellowstone, and peered across the white stream to the south, where in the flatland at the Big Horn's mouth the new fort stood that Henry's men had built. What perfect peace for such a nest of guilt! What satisfied immunity from woe! Yon sprawling shadow, pied with candle glow and plumed with sparkling wood smoke, might have been a homestead with the children gathered in to share its bounty through the holidays. You saw their faces round the gay hearth blaze, the hale old father in a mood for yarns, or boastful of the plenty of his barns, fruitage of honest toil and grateful lands, and, half a stranger to her folded hands, the mother with October in her hair and August in her face. One moment there you saw it, then the monstrous, brutal fact wiped out the dream and goaded him to act, though now to act seemed strangely like a dream. Descending from the bluff, he crossed the stream, the dry snow fifing to his eager stride. Reaching the fort stockade, he paused to bide the passing of a whimsy. Was it true, or was this but the fretted wraith of Hugh, whose flesh had fed the coyotes long ago? Still, through a chink he saw the candle glow, so like an eye that brazened out a wrong, and now there came a flight of muffled song, the rhythmic thudding of a booted heel that timed a squeaking fiddle to a reel. How swiftly men forget! The spawning earth is fat with graves, and what is one man worth that fiddles should be muted at his fall? He should have died and did not, that was all. Well, let the living jig it. He would turn back to the night, the spacious unconcern of wilderness that never played the friend. Now came the song and fiddling to an end, and someone laughed within. The old man winced, listened with bated breath, and was convinced 'twas Jamie laughing. Once again he heard. Joy filled a hush twixt heartbeats, like a bird, then like a famished cat his lurking hate pounced crushingly. He found the outer gate, beat on it with his shoulder, raised a cry. No doubt 'twas deemed a fitful wind went by, none stirred. But when he did not cease to shout, a door creaked open, and a man came out amid the spilling candle glimmer, raised the wicket in the outer gate, and gazed one moment on a face as white as death, because the beard was thick with frosted breath made mystic by the stars. Then came a gasp, the clatter of the falling wicket's hasp, the crunch of panic feet along the snow, and someone stammered huskily and low, "My God, I saw the old man's ghost out there." 'Twas spoken as one speaks who feels his hair prickle the scalp. And then another said, it seemed like Henry's voice, "The dead are dead. What talk is this, Le Bon? You saw him die. Who's there?" Hugh strove to shout, to give the lie to those within, but could not fetch a sound. Just so he dreamed of lying underground beside the Grand and hearing overhead the talk of men. Or was he really dead, and all this but a maggot in the brain? Then suddenly the clatter of a chain aroused him, and he saw the portal yawn and saw a bright rectangled patch of dawn as through a grave's mouth. No, 'twas candlelight poured through the open doorway on the night, and those were men before him, bulking black against the glow. Reality flashed back. He strode ahead and entered. At the door a falling fiddle jangled on the floor and left a deathly silence. On his bench the fiddler shrank. A row of eyes, ablench with terror, ran about the naked hall, and there was one who huddled by the wall and hid his face and shivered. For a spell that silence clung, and then the old man: "Well, is this the sort of welcome that I get? 'Twas not my time to feed the coyotes yet. Put on the pot and stew a chunk of meat, and you shall see how much a ghost can eat. I've journeyed far, if what I hear be true." Now in that none might doubt the voice of Hugh, nor yet the face, however it might seem a blurred reflection in a flowing stream. A buzz of wonder broke the trance of dread. "Good God!" the Major gasped. "We thought you dead. 2 men have testified they saw you die." "If they speak truth," Hugh answered, "then I lie, both here and by the Grand. If I be right, then 2 lie here and shall lie from this night. Which are they?" Hugh Henry answered, "Yon is one." The old man set the trigger of his gun and gazed on Jules, who cowered by the wall. Eyes blinked, expectant of the hammer's fall, ears strained, anticipative of the roar. But Hugh walked leisurely across the floor and kicked the croucher, saying, "Come, get up and wag your tail. I couldn't kill a pup." Then turning round: "I had a faithful friend. No doubt he too was with me to the end. Where's Jamie?" "Started out before the snows for Atkinson." End of part 4. Recorded by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. Part 5 of The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. Part 5. Jamie. The country of the Crows, through which the Bighorn and the Rosebud run, sees over mountain peaks the setting sun, and southward from the Yellowstone flung wide it broadens ever to the morning side, and has the powder on its vague frontier about the subtle changing of the year, ere even favoured valleys felt the stir of spring. And yet expectancy of her was like a pleasant rumour or repeat. Yet none may prove the sound of horses' feet went eastward through the silence of that land. For then it was there rode a little band of trappers out of Henry's Post to bear dispatches down to Atkinson, and there to furnish out a keelboat for the Horn. And 4 went lightly, but the 5th seemed worn as with a heavy heart, for that was he who should have died but did not. Silently he heard the careless parley of his men, and thought of how the spring should come again, that garish strumpet with her world-old lure, to waken hope where nothing may endure, to quicken love where loving is betrayed. Yet now and then some dream of Jamie made slow music in him for a little while, and they who rode beside him saw a smile glimmer upon that ruined face of grey, as on a winter fog the groping day pours glory through a momentary rift. Yet never did the gloom that bound him lift. He seemed as one who feeds upon his heart, and finds, despite the bitter and the smart, a little sweetness, and is glad for that. Now up the Powder, striking for the Platte across the bleak divide, the horseman went, attained that river where its course is bent from north to east, and, spurring on apace along the wintry valley, reached the place where from the west flows in the Laramie. Thence fearing to encounter with the Ree, they headed eastward through the barren land, to where, fleet-footed, down a track of sand, the Niobrara races for the morn, a gaunt-lawned runner. Here at length was born, upon the southern slopes, the baby Spring, a timid, fretful, ill-begotten thing, a suckle at the winter's withered paps. Not such as when announced by thunderclaps and ringed with swords of lightning she would ride, the haughty victrix and the mystic bride, clad splendidly as never Sheba's queen, before her marching multitudes of green in many bannered triumph, grudging, slow. Amid the fraying fringes of the snow the bunch grass sprouted, and the air was chill. Along the northern slopes 'twas winter still, and no root dreamed what triumph over death was nurtured now in some bleak Nazareth beyond the crest to sunward. On they spurred through vacancies that waited for the bird, and everywhere the odic presence dwelt. The southwest blew, the snow began to melt, and when they reached the valley of the Snake, the Niobrara's ice began to break. And all night long and all day long it made a sound as of a random cannonade, with rifles snarling down a skirmish line. The geese went over. Every tree and vine was dotted thick with leaf buds when they saw the little river of the Kiapaw grown mighty for the moment. Then they came, one evening when all thickets were aflame with pale green witch-fires and the windflowers blew, to where the headlong Niobrara threw his speed against the swollen Missouri's flank and hurled him roaring to the further bank, a giant staggered by a pygmy sling. Thence, plunging ever deeper into spring, across the greening prairie east by south they rode, and just above the Platte's wide mouth came, weary with the trail, to Atkinson. There all the vernal wonderwork was done. No carefree heart might find aught lacking there. The dove's call wandered in the drowsy air, a love dream brooded in the lucent haze. Priapic revellers, the shrieking jays, held mystic worship in the secret shade. Woodpeckers briskly plied their noisy trade along the tree boles, and their scarlet hoods flashed flame-like in the smoky cottonwoods. What lacked? Not sweetness in the sun-lulled breeze. The plum bloom, murmurous with bumblebees, was drifted deep in every draw and slough. Not colour, witcheries of gold and blue. The dandelion and the violet wove in the green. Might not the sad forget, the happy here have nothing more to seek? Lo, yonder by that pleasant little creek, how one might loll upon the grass and fish, and build the temple of one's wildest wish 'twixt nibbles. Surely there was quite enough of wizard timber and of wonder stuff to rear it nobly to the blue-domed roof. Yet there was one whose spirit stood aloof from all this joyousness, a grey old man, no nearer now than when the quest began to what he sought on that long winter trail. Ay, Jamie had been there, but when the tale that roving trappers brought from Kiowa was told to him, he seemed as one who saw a ghost, and could but stare on it, they said, until one day he mounted horse and fled into the north, a devil-ridden man. "I've got to go and find him if I can," was all he said for days before he left. And what of Hugh? So long of love bereft, so long sustained and driven by his hate, a touch of ruth now made him desolate, no longer eager to avenge the wrong, with not enough of pity to be strong, and just enough of love to choke and sting. A grey old hulk amid the surge of spring, he floundered on a lee shore of the heart. But when the boat was ready for the start up the long watery stairway to the Horn, Hugh joined the party, and the year was shorn of blooming girlhood as they forged amain into the north. The late green-mantled plain grew sallow, and the ruthless golden shower of summer wrought in lust upon the flower that withered in the endless martyrdom to seed. The scarlet quickened on the plum about the heart's mouth when they came there too. Among the Mandan's grapes were turning blue, and they were purple at the Yellowstone. A frosted scrub oak, standing out alone upon a barren bluff top, gazing far above the crossing at the Powder's bar, was spattered with the blood of summer slain. So it was autumn in the world again, and all those months of toil had yielded naught to Hugh. How often is the seeker sought by what he seeks, a blind, heart-breaking game? For always had the answer been the same from roving trapper and at trading post. Ay, one who seemed to stare upon a ghost and followed willy-nilly where it led had gone that way in search of Hugh, they said, a haggard, blue-eyed, yellow-headed chap. And often had the old man thought, mayhap he'll be at Henry's post and we shall meet, and to forgive and to forget were sweet. 'Tis for its nurse that vengeance whets the tooth, And oh, the golden time of Jamie's youth, that it should darken for a greybeard's whim. So Hugh had brooded, till there came on him the pity of a slow rain after drouth. But at the crossing of the Rosebud's mouth a shadow fell upon his growing dream. A band of Henry's traders bound downstream, who paused to traffic in the latest word, down river news for matters seen and heard, in higher waters, had not met the lad, nor yet encountered any one who had. Alas, the journey back to yesterwhiles, how tangled are the trails, the stubborn miles, how wearily they stretch. And if one win the long way back in search of what has been, shall he find aught that is not strange and new? Thus wrought the melancholy news in Hugh, as he turned back with those who brought the news. For more and more he dreaded now to lose what doubtful seeking rendered doubly dear. And in the time when keen winds stripped the year, he came with those to where the poplar joins the greater river. There Assinoboines, rich from the summer's hunting, had come down, and flung along the flat their ragged town, that traders might bring goods and winter there. So leave the heartsick greybeard. Otherwhere the final curtain rises on the play. 'Tis dead of winter now, for day on day the blizzard wind has thundered, sweeping wide from Mississippi to the Great Divide. Out of the north, beyond Saskatchewan, brief evening glimmers like an inverse dawn. After a long white night the tempest dies, the snow haze lifts. Now let the curtain rise upon Milk River Valley, and reveal the stars like broken glass on frosted steel. Above the Piegan lodges, huddled deep in snowdrifts like a freezing flock of sheep, a crystal weight the dread cold crushes down, and no one moves about the little town that seems to grovel as a thing that fears. But see! A lodge flap swings, a squaw appears, hunched with the sudden cold. Her footsteps creak shrill in the hush. She stares upon the bleak white skyline for a moment, then goes in. We follow her, push back the flap of skin, enter the lodge, inhale the smoke-tanged air, and blink upon the little faggot flare that blossoms in the centre of the room. Unsteady shadows haunt the outer gloom wherein the walls are guessed at. Upward far, the smoke vent now and then reveals a star as in a well. The ancient squaw, astoop, her face light stricken, stirs a pot of soup that simmers with a pleasant smell and sound. A gnarled old man, cross-legged upon the ground, sits brooding near. He feeds the flame with sticks. It brightens. Lo, a leaden crucifix upon the wall! These heathen eyes, though dim, have seen the white man's God, and cling to him, lest on the sunset trail slow feet should err. But look again! From yonder bed of fur beside the wall a white man strives to rise. He lifts his head with yearning, sightless eyes, gropes for the light. A mass of golden hair falls round the face that sickness and despair somehow make old, albeit he is young. His weak voice, stumbling to the mongrel tongue of traders, flings a question to the squaw. "You saw no black robe? Tell me what you saw." And she, brief spoken as her race, replies: "Heaped snow, sharp stars, a coyote on the rise." The blind youth huddles moaning in the furs. The firewood spits and pops. The boiled pot purrs and sputters on this little isle of sound. The sea of winter silence presses round. One feels it like a menace. Now the crone dips out a cup of soup, and having blown upon it, takes it to the sick man there, and bids him eat. With wild unseeing stare he turns upon her. "Why are they so long? I cannot eat. I've done a mighty wrong. It chokes me. Oh, no, no! I must not die until the black robe comes." His feeble cry sinks to a whisper. "Tell me, did they go, your kinsmen?" "They went south before the snow." "And will they tell the black robe?" "They will tell." The crackling of the faggots for a spell seems very loud. Again the sick man moans, and struggling with the weakness in his bones, would gain his feet, but cannot. "Go again, and tell me that you see the bulks of men dim in the distance there." The squaw obeys, returns anon to crouch beside the blaze, numb-fingered and a shudder from the night. The vacant eyes that hunger for the light are turned upon her. "Tell me what you saw. Or maybe snowshoes sounded up the draw. Quick, tell me what you saw and heard out there." Heaped snow, sharp stars, big stillness everywhere. One clutching at thin ice with numbing grip cries while he hopes, but when his fingers slip he takes the final plunge without a sound. So sinks the youth now hopeless all around. The winter silence presses in, the walls grow vague and vanish in the gloom that crawls close to the failing fire. The Piegans sleep. Night hovers midway down the morning steep. The sick man drowses. Nervously he starts and listens, hears no sound except his heart's, and that weird murmur brooding stillness makes. But stealthily upon the quiet breaks, vague as the coursing of the hearer's blood, a muffled rhythmic beating, thud on thud that growing nearer deepens to a crunch. So hungry for the distance, snowshoes munch the crusted leagues of winter stride by stride. A camp dog barks. The hollow world outside brims with the running howl of many curs. Now wide awake, half risen in the furs, the youth can hear low voices and the creak of snowshoes near the lodge. His wild, thin shriek startles the old folk from their slumberings. He comes, the black robe! Now the door flap swings, and briefly one who splutters pagan bars the way, then enters. Now the patch of stars is darkened with a greater bulk that bends beneath the lintel. Peace be with you, friends, and peace with him herein who suffers pain. So speaks the second comer of the twain, a white man by his voice, and he who lies beside the wall with empty, groping eyes turned to the speaker. There can be no peace for me, good father, till this gnawing cease, the gnawing of a great wrong I have done. The big man leans above the youth. My son, grown husky with the word, the deep voice breaks, and for a little spell the whole man shakes as with the clinging cold. Have faith and hope. 'Tis often nearest dawn when most we grope. Does not the good book say, who seek shall find? But, father, I am broken now and blind, and I have sought and I have lost the way. To which the stranger, what would Jesus say? Hark, in the silence of the heart 'tis said, by their own weakness are the feeble sped. The humblest feet are surest for the goal. The blind shall see the city of the soul. Lay down your burden at his feet tonight. Now while the fire, replenished, bathes in light the young face scrawled with suffering and care, flinging ironic glories on the hair and glinting on dull eyes that once flashed blue, the sick one tells the story of old Hugh to him whose face, averted from the glow, still lurks in gloom. The winds of battle blow once more along the steep. Again one sees the rescue from the fury of the Rees, the greybeard's fondness for the gay lad, then the westward march with Major Henry's men, with all that happened there upon the Grand. And so we hit the trail of Henry's band, the youth continues, for we feared to die, and dread of shame was ready with the lie we carried to our comrades. Hugh was dead and buried there beside the Grand, we said. Could any doubt that what we said was true? They even praised our courage, but I knew the nights were hell because I heard his cries and saw the crows a-pecking at his eyes, the coyotes tearing at him. Oh my God, I tried and tried to think him under sod, but every time I slept it was the same. And then one night I lay awake. He came, I say he came. I know I hadn't slept. Amid a light like rainy dawn he crept out of the dark upon his hands and knees. The wound he got that day among the Rees was like red fire. A snarl of bloody hair hung round the eyes that had a pleading stare, and down the ruined face and gory beard big teardrops rolled. He went as he appeared, trailing a fog of light that died away. And I grew old before I saw the day. Oh, father, I had paid too much for breath. The devil traffics in the fear of death, and may God pity anyone who buys what I have bought with treachery and lies. This rat-like gnawing in my breast. I knew I couldn't rest until I buried Hugh, and so I told the Major I would go to Atkinson with letters ere the snow had choked the trails. Jules wouldn't come along. He didn't seem to realise the wrong. He called me foolish, couldn't understand. I rode alone, not south, but to the Grand. Day long my horse beat thunder from the sod, accusing me, and all my prayers to God seemed flung in vain at bolted gates of brass. And in the night the wind among the grass hissed endlessly the story of my shame. I do not know how long I rode. I came upon the Grand at last, and found the place, and it was empty. Not a sign or trace was left to show what end had come to Hugh. And oh, that grave! It gaped upon the blue, a death wound pleading dumbly for the slain. I filled it up and fled across the plain, and somehow came to Atkinson at last. And there I heard the living Hugh had passed along the river northward in the fall. Oh, father, he had found the strength to crawl that long, heart-breaking distance back to life, though Jules had taken blanket, steel and knife, and I, his trusted comrade, had his gun. They said I'd better stay at Atkinson because old Hugh was surely hunting me, white hot to kill. I did not want to flee or hide from him. I even wished to die. If so, this aching cancer of a lie might be torn out forever. So I went as eager as the homesick homeward bent in search of him and peace. But I was cursed, for even when his stolen rifle burst and spewed upon me this eternal night, I might not die as any other might. But God so willed that friendly Piegans came to spare me yet a little unto shame. O father, is there any hope for me? Great hope indeed, my son, so huskily the other answers. I recall a case like yours, no matter what the time and place. 'Twas somewhat like the story that you tell, each seeking and each sought, and both in hell. But in the tale I mind, they met at last. The youth sits up, white-faced and breathing fast. They met, you say? What happened? Quick, oh quick! The old man found the dear lad blind and sick, and both forgave. 'Twas easy to forgive, for oh, we have so short a time to live. Whereat the youth, who's here? The black robe's gone. Whose voice is this? The grey of winter dawn, now creeping round the door flap, lights the place and shows thin fingers groping for a face deep scarred and hoary with the frost of years, whereover runs a new springtide of tears. Oh Jamie, 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 I am Hugh. There was no black robe yonder. Will I do? End of part 5. End of The Song of Hugh Glass by John NEIHARDT. Recorded by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com.